Chapter 239. You cannot harm my mother under Hishi's clothes. The little golden dragon was a bundle of nerves as he stealthily watched Feng Lianying's reactions. At the same time, he was also trying to appease Dandan and pushing away his small claws. Even though she was clearly unwilling, they watched as Feng Lianying carried her sword with her as she walked out of Zijin Palace, causing the little golden dragon to finally heave a long sigh of relief. Then, turning towards Dandan with a proud smile, his mouth noisily opened and closed as he said, "See, I told you that I could handle that evil woman." However, the little golden dragon had yet to finish speaking, when Dandan suddenly cried out in alarm, and his pale pink body abruptly swelled as blinding lights burst from his body. The next moment, a bang echoed throughout the room, and the two little spirit pets flew out from under Hishi's clothes to land heavily fell upon the ground. Dandan uttered a painful wail and his swollen body deflated at a speed faster than the naked eye could follow, becoming smaller and smaller. His pig appearance seemed to have lost all moisture, and his soft skin was no longer as shiny and smooth as before. Rather, it was now all wrinkled as if completely dried out. "Dandan, are you okay?" The little golden dragon cried out in fear, shock and terror clearly written across his face. This foolish little pig, in order to protect him. I had thought that it was truly an order from Zijin's master, yet as it turns out, it was only two cunning little beasts. I was almost deceived by the two of you. When the little golden dragon heard that, he raised his small head and furiously said, "My master has already begun the process of receiving the inheritance of Zijin Palace, which means that he will soon become the owner of this secret territory, the younger family member of Zijin's master. If you dare harm my master, be careful because Zijin's master will definitely seek you out to pay back your debt." Upon hearing that, Feng Lianying burst into a fit of laughter. "Since you said that the acceptance has just began, then that means it's not yet complete. If I kill him now, he's not a descendant of Zijin's master, so naturally no one will take revenge on behalf of him. What's more, can it be that you really think my Luli sect is afraid of Zijin's master?" After saying that, the look on her face suddenly became fierce and she gloomily said, "If I can't receive the inheritance, then I won't let others receive it either." With that remark, her figure flashed as she charged straight towards Hishi cloaked in an intense murderous aura. "Mother!" Dandan cried out loudly, and without thinking, his figure once again swelled as he pounced over before Hishi. "You cannot harm my mother." The power of a gold core stage martial artist's sword was very formidable, and Dandan was merely a newborn primary spirit. How could he withstand it? When the sword pierced his body, Dandan let out a shrill scream, and in a flash he fell into Hishi's arms as he spat out a mouthful of blood. His previous pink skin was now nearly completely covered in wrinkles and lifelessly dull. It was as if he would shatter into a million pieces at any time. But the next moment, Dandan shockingly grew even larger to protect Hishi. His voice was brimming with fear and tears, but it also carried stubbornness and the strong conviction of one prepared to sacrifice their life for their beliefs as he said, "You cannot harm my mother. Mother, don't be afraid, Dandan will certainly protect you." Feng Lianying withdrew her long sword, and as her towering figure looked down at the little pig who was firmly protecting Hishi, she sneered in contempt. "Based on what abilities do you want to block me? Such nonsense. Well, since you're so anxious to court death, then I shall kill you and your master." "Little foolish pig, are you insane? Hurry up and run away. She's a gold core stage martial artist. How could you be her opponent? If you continue like this you'll die." Dandan firmly shook his head, stubbornness and persistence showing on his face. "Mother is the best mother in this world. Dandan will absolutely not abandon mother to run away. If you're afraid, then you can go." Chapter 240. How could I be afraid? When the little golden dragon heard the last sentence, he stomped in anger as he scolded, "Who said I would ran away? I only wanted to deceive that shameful woman, that's all. You're merely a gold core stage martial artist. Do you really think that I'm afraid of you?" Upon saying that, the little golden dragon leaped in front of Dandan and started to curse as he faced Feng Lianying. "You're such a venomous-hearted woman. I'm not saying your looks are ugly, but that your heart is so vicious. It's no wonder that Zijin's master doesn't give you the inheritance. Take a look at my master. In comparison to your looks, his are more beautiful than yours, and his ability is higher than yours. Which idiot would choose you, an ugly woman, over my master instead? Standing behind the little golden dragon, Dandan promptly joined in with, Exactly, such an ugly woman. She can't even compare to one of mother's fingertips. Cross-eyed, hooked nose, toady face, and ugly looks with a vicious heart. Be careful in the future. When you give birth to a son, he won't have a butthole, and after you die, you'll go straight down to the 18 levels of hell. Since Dandan had still been inside his huge egg from the beginning, his knowledge was now incomplete. Each of his owners had had different personalities, so naturally he received all different kinds of information, including some things that were weird. Now that he was angry and worried, he spat out the most vulgar curse words that he had learnt. If Hashi was awake at this moment and could hear her cute and clumsy spirit pet cursing and shouting at people like a wife in the street, she would certainly be so shocked that her jaw would drop to the floor. On the other hand, when the little golden dragon heard those curses, he loudly cheered. Then, looking at Dandan as if he himself had taught him, he continued adding insults. Little foolish pig, some of your phrases were wrong. This woman is so ugly that whoever marries her will have bad luck. So how would anyone be willing to marry her? Since no one will marry her, how could she give birth to a son without a butthole? Feng Lianying was born noble, surrounded by people who flattered her, fawned upon her, and who were always trying to curry favor with her. From since she was a child up until now, she had never suffered such insults and abuse. At this moment, she only felt her chi and blood boiling, her face clearly showing murderous intent. Two lowly beasts actually dared to insult me so much, very good. Today, I'll skin you both alive, slowly pull your tendons out one by one, and dismember your bodies piece by piece. You'll then be reunited with your master in the underworld. As Feng Lianying's words left her mouth, a fireball condensed in her hand, before she then fiercely threw it towards them. In a flash, the fireball transformed into several sharp arrows, all of them heading towards Hashi, Dandan, and the little golden dragon. We can't let her hurt Mother. Dandan shouted loudly, immediately making his body swell large again to protect Hashi. The little golden dragon's complexion paled. He was more knowledgeable than Dandan, and therefore he knew just how terrible one strike from a gold core martial artist was. However, when he looked at the foolish pig behind him, completely disregarding his own life, the little golden dragon clenched his teeth and the golden light surrounding his body suddenly exploded. Boom! An earth-shattering noise was heard that caused Zijin Palace to shake, as if a major disaster had befallen them all. After the sound of the explosion quieted down, the little golden dragon fell to the ground and spat out a mouthful of blood as he slowly started to faint. At this moment, a large area of his dragon scales were burnt, the horns on top of his head were broken, and his entire body was covered with blood and ghastly wounds. The little amount of energy that he had previously managed to collect with great difficulty after becoming unsealed was now completely used up. Dandan started crying after seeing such a miserable appearance, and his body rapidly shrunk back to normal size as he went to the little golden dragon's side. Long, are you all right? Don't die. Little foolish pig. The little golden dragon spat out another mouthful of blood and foam, baring his teeth as he said, Don't you know who I am? How can I die? So easily. He was unable to finish what he was saying before he fainted, the golden light around his body fading without a trace. Chapter 241. The shopkeeper of Xingda Hall Feng Lianying sneered, You're a young dragon that's not much better than a snake. Even the low-level disciples of my Lu Li sect might be able to catch you as a pet, and yet here you are, daring to be so arrogant in front of me. Don't overestimate your capabilities and attempt something impossible. As far as a useless spirit pet goes, you're the most useless. Since you were so devoted in protecting him, then I'll help you all die together. Upon saying that, her long sword suddenly lit up with a blinding red light and was surrounded by leaping flames, as if it was about to burn all of Zijin Palace down. Fear and sadness clearly showed on Dandan's face. But in the next moment he resolutely clenched his jaw and leaped into the air, firmly wrapping himself around Heshi. He had experienced thousands of years of waiting and loneliness before he had finally managed to meet Mother. Mother was so gentle, so kind, she made so many delicious types of food for him, and she would even hug him to appease him. If he lost Mother, then would he have to return to that boundless darkness, where there was no longer any food, no light, and no more of Mother's hugs to warm him? But he didn't want that to happen. As long as he could be together with Mother, even if he had to pay any price, he would do it without any hesitation. Danden's body grew bigger and bigger, and the spiritual power in his body started surging violently, forming into a faint spiritual power vortex. Next, the long sword enveloped in blazing flames issued an ear-piercing buzzing as it was aimed straight at the two spirit pets. Danden's eyes filled with determination, and he recklessly launched the spiritual vortex. But suddenly, a refreshing screen of water appeared before their eyes. During a moment of life or death, it had unexpectedly blocked that whizzing long sword and its blazing flames. Feng Lianying's complexion became extremely unsightly, and she asked in a dark voice, "Who is it? Come out here now." Her words had barely fallen when the door of Zijin Palace was slowly pushed open, and a man dressed in a black robe entered the palace holding a wooden protection tablet in his outstretched hands. The man's looks were scholarly and ordinary, while his voice when speaking carried a refined and amiable tone. "Ice Lotus Fairy, your reputation is well known, and your Luli sect is a dignified and large sect. By taking advantage of such a precarious position and mounting an attack on a member of the younger generation, it wouldn't be good if it were to spread outside, right?" When she clearly saw the man's face, Feng Lianying's expression showed a hint of disgust in a flash. "I was wondering who was it, and as it turns out, it's actually shopkeeper Zhou of Xingde Hall. You're merely trash who depended on medicinal pills to forcefully accumulate enough spiritual power to reach gold core stage, and yet you dare to meddle in this fairy's business. Just who do you think you are?" The person who had come was Zhou Yenan, a second-ranked doctor and shopkeeper of Xingde Hall that Heshi became acquainted with when she was rescuing Xiao Li's brother. Zhou Yenan quickly walked over to stand before Heshi, and Zijin Palace's doors slowly shut behind him. Inhaling a deep breath, he said, "The people in this world have a duty to meddle in affairs that have nothing to do with them if someone is about to be hurt. Furthermore, this is young Master Shi, who this humble one happens to be acquainted with. Hence, no matter what, this humble one can't just sit back and watch him die by your hands." Feng Lianying's words were laced with contempt as she sneered, "If those words were said to me by your master, Gu Lu Feng, I might have shown some fear, but since it was you, you have no qualifications to talk to me like that." Finished speaking, Feng Lianying brandished the long sword in her hand once more, and ruthlessly shot towards Zhou Yenan. With a bang, a water mist rose into the air and blocked Feng Lianying's strike. However, this time the water barrier vibrated extremely hard, like it was only just managing to withstand the attack and resist shattering into pieces. Feng Lianying retrieved the long sword, and seeing the wooden protection tablet still in Zhou Yenan's hands emitting a faint silvery light, she sneered, "You think that such a lousy protection tablet could block my attack? Dream on." Chapter 242, unable to contend like she had thought of something, Feng Lianying's jealous-filled gaze swept over towards Heshi and she gloomily said, "Since shopkeeper Zhou came here, it was presumably to also receive the inheritance of Zijin Palace, right? However, this palace has now been taken away by that stinky boy using his despicable methods. Shopkeeper Zhou, didn't you want to get the inheritance?" Upon hearing this, shopkeeper Zhou stared blankly, before then glancing in disbelief at the boy meditating with his eyes closed. Young master once said that if one wants to receive Zijin Palace's inheritance, that they must at least be a martial artist of gold core stage or higher, and moreover, they need to have a certain level of medical expertise. Young Master Shi's cultivation base was clearly just chi refining stage, but unexpectedly he was able to get the inheritance. Could it be that his medical expertise is really so high that it's reached perfection? When Dandan heard Feng Lianying slandering Heshi, he angrily shouted, "Evil woman who won't ever be able to be married off. It was obviously because your skills weren't as good as Mother's that you lost, and Zijin's master even said that you were inferior to Mother." With your venomous heart you were jealous of Mother, and thus you wanted to take advantage and kill her when she's in the process of receiving the inheritance. Such a vile person. Shameful and malicious people like you will absolutely not have a good ending. Zhou Yan'an was baffled. Young master, she was a man, yet his spirit pet called him mother. At the same time, Feng Lianying on the opposite side was angered so much that she trembled all over. As she glared at Dandan and Heshi, it was clear that she wanted to mince them up into meat patties. Zhou Yan'an, you better get out of here if you know what's good for you, or else I will kill you together with them. As her words fell, a formidable and imposing spiritual pressure burst out from Feng Lianying's body, tightly wrapping itself around Zhou Yan'an and Dandan. Zhou Yan'an instantly turned deathly pale, causing him to fall back a step. The light of the wooden protection tablet in his hand seemed to dim slightly. His eyes expressed his dread and panic. It's precisely as the Ice Lotus Fairy had said. He had depended on medicinal pills given to him by his young master to help him forcibly accumulate enough spiritual power to raise his cultivation base to gold core stage. And it was all done for the purpose of entering the secret territory and obtaining Zijin Palace's inheritance. His strength simply wouldn't be able to contend with the woman's before his eyes, so the wisest choice was to leave. However, Zhou Yan'an turned his head back and caught a glimpse of Heshi. The youngster's long eyelashes were resting gently on soft, round cheeks, while his exquisite skin was sparkling and translucent. It was like this person was carved out of white jade, exceptionally beautiful and delicate. An image of this youth rescuing that boy emerged before his eyes. He was radiant and glorious, as if any incurable disease in this world could easily be solved by his hands. If it was him, perhaps he could really cure. It wasn't certain, but maybe. If it was him, perhaps he would have more confidence than himself and be more successful in accomplishing a miracle. With these thoughts, Zhou Yan'an clenched his jaw, his face showing obvious determination. Ice Lotus Fairy, I'm a person who learned medicine, and we medical practitioners have benevolent hearts and are charitable in our deeds as a fundamental rule. With your conduct of willfully killing a teenager because of hate and jealousy, you don't deserve the title of doctor. Today, this humble one finally knows that the Ice Lotus Fairy, who was originally rumored to be as spotless as jade, with the heart of a bodhisattva, was nowhere near as good as she was made out to be. Good, very good. Since you yourself want to court death, then don't blame me for being merciless. Zhou Yan'an's remark was more refined than Dandan's, but the meaning still caused Feng Lianying to become furiously angry. With bloodshot eyes, the muscles on her face slightly trembled because of jealousy and hatred, turning her previously beautiful face into something sinister and distorted. This appearance completely replaced her usually irreproachable image. If it was the normal Feng Lianying, then no matter how much she hated a person, she would have perfectly controlled her temperament and maintained her graceful appearance. Chapter 243. Advancing to Meridian Stage. But today, with her fail in competing over Zijin Palace's inheritance, the hatred she had for Heshi made her extremely irritated. All this, coupled with Dandan, the little golden dragon, and Zhou Yan'an's words on top of that, it made her completely lose all rational, and she was unable to maintain her fairy-like image. Zhou Yan'an's strength could in no way contend with Feng Lianying's power, and as a result, after just a few short fights, he fell into a disadvantageous position, his body sustaining a few wounds. Watching from the side, Dandan suddenly jumped over in an attempt to distract Feng Lianying and assist Zhou Yan'an, but Feng Lianying ruthlessly kicked him away with a burst of spare spiritual power. This caused him to smash into Heshi's body so hard that he ended up spitting out a mouthful of blood. Feng Lianying pointed the edge of her blazing sword at Zhou Yan'an, severely striking him. With a bam, the wooden protection tablet in Zhou Yan'an's hand shattered into pieces. After which, he staggered before tumbling to the ground, his complexion deathly pale. This wooden protection tablet was a spiritual item given to him by his young master, and it was able to resist the full strength of an attack from a martial artist at the peak of gold core stage. Zhou Yan'an had been able to avoid so many of Feng Lianying's attacks so far because of this protection tablet. Now that the protection tablet was broken, and the spiritual power in his body had been used up to the last drop, He could no longer withstand another blow from Feng Lianying. A cold and malicious expression was clearly visible on Feng Lianying's face. Whether it was Zhou Yenin, the two little beasts, or Heshi, she absolutely wouldn't allow them to live. In this world, any person who dared to humiliate her would pay the price 1,000 times over, and they wouldn't be allowed to die a natural death. However, since Feng Lianying was immersed in her hatred, while Zhou Yenin was focused on her and his despair, neither of them noticed what was currently happening with Heshi. As she sat silent and cross-legged to the side, her body began to emit a faint silver light. Dandan raised his small head, and his big eyes welled with tears as he looked at Heshi with a surprised expression. "Mother!" Along with the light slowly getting brighter, at a rate faster than the eye could see, Heshi's spiritual power started to frantically increase. A tiny whirlpool formed in her dantian, and little by little, it started absorbing the spiritual energy from Zijin Palace into her body. Next, Heshi's cultivation base rose from the peak of Foundation Establishment Stage to the completion of Foundation Establishment Stage, all the way up to Meridian Stage. Finally, she stopped advancing once she reached the second rank of Meridian Stage. It must be known that in Mi Luo continent, a martial artist's rank was categorized and divided into Qi Refining Stage, Foundation Establishment Stage, Meridian Stage, Gold Core Stage, Nascent Soul Stage, Divine Stage, Void and Darkness Stage, Overcoming Tribulation Stage, and lastly, Completeness Stage. The higher the rank a martial artist reached, the harder advancing would become. It would be as if one was ascending to heaven. For a martial artist with ordinary innate talents, advancing from Foundation Establishment Stage to Meridian Stage would take at least several decades. Even a genius martial artist with outstanding innate talents would need at least 5 to 6 years. But Heshi had unexpectedly, in just one short month, managed to jump to the second rank of Meridian Stage without a cultivation base. If such an advancement speed were to spread out, it would absolutely shake the entire Mi Luo continent to its core. With the silver light slowly dissipating, it ultimately seemed that everything had completely entered Heshi's body. Next, the eyelashes of the youngster slowly trembled as he sat cross-legged, and he slowly opened his eyes. This scene was stunning, yet it all happened within the blink of an eye. So except for Dandan, Feng Lianying and Zhou Yenin didn't discover what had been going on. Seeing the sword about to reach him once more, Zhou Yenin closed his eyes in despair and he muttered 2 words, "Young master." However, the pain he expected didn't come and instead he suddenly felt something wrap around his waist. Zhou Yenin's body flew into the air, brushing past the tip of Feng Lianying's sword in the nick of time. Almost at the same time, the entirety of Zijin Palace erupted in a burst of dazzling silver and purple lights, as if millions of shooting stars streaked across a night sky, making it difficult for people to open their eyes. Chapter 244, Disappearance of Zijin Palace. Feeling pain in her head due to the blinding light, Feng Lianying quickly covered her eyes. And through the gaps between her fingers, she could vaguely see the blinding white light converging in one direction. A gentle breeze blew past after the light had completely dissipated, and she was shocked to discover that she was no longer in Zijin Palace, but was now standing in a vast field. No, it should be said that Zijin Palace had completely disappeared, and standing opposite her was Zhou Yenin, who was still in a panicked state. Tied around his waist was a white bone whip, while his clothes were tattered and soaked with blood. His breath was released in pants, as if his spiritual power would dry up at any moment. But Feng Lianying was already too busy to worry about Zhou Yenin, her crazed, unwavering gaze falling on the teenager beside him. "Shiyu, you're such a shameless person. Actually daring to receive the inheritance." Not only had he received the inheritance, his cultivation base had also advanced extremely fast. When he was still in the inheritance void, he was obviously only at Qi Refining Stage, but now he had reached Foundation Establishment Stage. This must be because Zijin's master had passed down some sort of secret technique for him to enhance his cultivation base in such a short amount of time. If the one who received the inheritance had been her, then perhaps she would have been able to break through to the peak of Gold Core Stage. It was because this stinky brat, this bastard, had caused her to lose her inheritance. As soon as Dandan saw that Heshi had awoken, he was no longer able to bear it and immediately pounced into her arms as he loudly cried, "Mother, you finally woke up, what?" Dandan was scared he wouldn't see you again. Once Heshi hugged Dandan, she felt that something was wrong. The little pink pig's skin was previously soft and smooth, yet now it had become all wrinkled. Furthermore, the color of his skin was all dull and lifeless, while in the corner of his mouth there was a distinct trail of blood. "Dandan, are you injured?" "What? Mother, it was that evil woman who bullied us. She beat Long to death, and she even wanted to kill mother and uncle." "What?" Dandan wept with grief. Even though he was still immature, he had never in his life encountered anyone so repulsive and bloodthirsty. It was the first time he had known that people could be so awful, so cruel. Heshi shifted her gaze towards the little golden dragon beside her foot, and saw that he was indeed covered all over with cuts and bruises. And as she examined his dying form, she noticed that even both of his horns were broken, exposing bloody wounds. And laying at her side, with his spiritual power completely used up, was a man struggling to breathe. She instantly recognized him as shopkeeper Zhou of Xingde Hall. This person and these spirit pets, had they ended up in such a miserable state in order to protect her? A strange warm feeling surged in Heshi's heart. It was sour and painful, making her feel touched and distressed at the same time. But when her gaze moved towards Feng Lianying, the look on her face became cold and furious in a flash. This is the so-called Ice Lotus Fairy, whose skill in the inheritance void had been inferior. She had actually wanted to kill her in the real world, even injuring Dandan so severely. Thinking until here, the glint of a cold murderous aura flashed within Hishi's eyes. "Young Master Shi, hurry up and run away. We aren't strong enough to be her opponents," Zhou Yenin said weakly. "I've informed my young master of the situation, so as long as my young master comes, he can save you. Don't mind me, quickly escape." A trace of surprise showed on Heshi's face. She hadn't expected that a stranger she would meet by chance would help her, but he had recklessly risked his life just for her. Only, no matter what the purpose of Zhou Yenin helping her was she, Heshi, the type of person who would abandon her benefactor and run away in order to protect her own safety? Chapter 245, kowtow to apologize. When Zhou Yenin didn't see him moving, he became anxious. "Young Master Shi, my spiritual power is used up, and my meridians are damaged. It's certain that I won't be able to escape, so you should quickly go, otherwise, it'll be too late." Heshi didn't pay attention to his words. Rather, she rapidly took out her silver needles and in a flash sealed several of his major acupuncture points. As his acupuncture points were sealed, the spiritual energy and power that leaked from Zhou Yenin's damaged meridians slowly stopped, and his pale complexion began to return to normal. Not waiting for Zhou Yenin to say anything further, Heshi quickly fished out a few spiritual supplement pills and stuffed it into his mouth, before indifferently saying, "It's only a small injury. Why should you make out as if you were half dead? Rest assured, you and I won't die." Slowly he felt spiritual energy gathering in his dantian, and even his meridians which had previously been burning gradually started to cool down. Zhou Yenin was astonished, and as he looked at Heshi, his gaze steadily became more respectful. Yet when he saw Feng Lianying's dark expression as she walked towards them carrying her sword, he couldn't help but become anxious. "Young Master Shi, even if you were able to save this humble one's life, with just our strength alone, we're simply not able to be a match with Ice Lotus Fairy. I'll only drag you down." Zhou Yenin's words hadn't yet finished, when he suddenly felt his throat clog and he could no longer utter any sound. Heshi coldly withdrew her finger that had been pressing on his voice acupuncture point, and indifferently said, "You're too noisy, go to the side and obediently watch. Who said that we weren't a match with that damned woman and could only die? Even if I really have to die, I must shed a layer of that vicious White Lotus's skin. In this world, no one can injure my Shiyu's people without paying the price." Feng Lianying's eyes were still dark, as if they contained venom. Yet hearing this just as she was starting to calm down caused her to burst into a fit of loud laughter. "Who do you think you are? You're merely Foundation establishment stage trash. You think that since you received Zijin Palace's inheritance that you'll be able to go against me? In your dreams. Once that was said, Feng Lianying's expression became extremely dark and sinister. If you hand over the golden Bodhi tree and Zijin Palace now, this fairy will kindly leave your corpse intact. Otherwise, don't blame me for being merciless. My Luli sect has so many methods to torture people, and at that time, I'll let you have a taste of what it means to live in agony yet be unable to die. By then, even if you beg for forgiveness, it will certainly be too late. He sneered, then took a confident step forward before indifferently saying, if you want me to hand over the golden Bodhi tree and Zijin Palace, I can. That's as long as you, Feng Lianing, kneel on the ground and kowtow towards me, shopkeeper Zhou, and my spirit pets to apologize. Furthermore, admit to the people in this world that you, Ice Lotus Fairy, are nothing but a reputation with no substance, a woman with a venomous heart. Then, I'll give the inheritance to you. How is it? You bastard, you court death. Once she heard that, Feng Lianying flew into a rage. With a blazing flame springing up around her entire body, the long sword in her hand formed out countless swordlights that shot straight towards He. He immediately threw Dandan and the little golden dragon into her space, and seeing the swordlights flying towards her, she abruptly brandished the white bone whip in her hand. The white bone whip transformed into a whip with layer upon layer of shadow, and mixing with a murderous aura that was as cold as ice, it then enveloped the swordlights into a ball. With the movement of Hishi's feet blurring into shadow, she disappeared from where she was currently standing in the blink of an eye. Hishi's ice spiritual power was of course unable to resist a fire attack by a gold core stage martial artist. So the icy cold energy was rapidly engulfed by the flames, turning it into steam before it disappeared without a trace. But within this split-second gap, He had also disappeared. This resulted in the long sword hurtling past and returning to Feng Lianying's hand without success once again. 1. Swordlight, also translated as a sword ray. A dazzling, powerful energy attack released from the edge of a blade. Forming swordlight generally requires a profound cultivation base and a deep mastery of swordsmanship. Chapter 246, Dual Attributes of Water and Fire, Heavenly Spiritual Roots, Bastard. If you have the abilities, then don't hide. Do you think that just because you can hide, you can really avoid my attack? Feng Lianying gnashed her teeth, and with her figure blurring, a barrage of blazing darts flew everywhere. With the darts practically flying all around, no matter how fast she moved, it was impossible for her to dodge this round of attack. Internally overjoyed, the corner of Feng Lianying's mouth curled into a sinister smile as she imagined all the holes about to be poked into He, turning her into a sieve. However, the next moment, her wide smile froze. She watched as those burning darts, after gaining a few meters, suddenly seemed like they encountered something. Unexpectedly, it slowed down their speed, and somehow, it began to force the darts to face a different direction, before they wobbled in the air and fell to the ground. Next, the flames slowly extinguished. When she saw this, Feng Lianying's face was so gloomy that it looked like it was almost dripping water, appearing particularly cold. He unhurriedly appeared before Feng Lianying once more, but this time, she was accompanied by countless clones that flashed into view one after another. Each one of the clones had a contemptuous sneer on their face, while a melodious and penetrating voice rang out carrying a cold, murderous aura. Ice Lotus Fairy, your trick was only assistive. This was a technique that He had used when she was still an assassin, illusionary step. Originally, if she would have used this technique on a martial artist with a high divine sense, it wouldn't have been effective at all. However, now that He had advanced, her spiritual power and speed had greatly increased. In this world of martial artists, only the swiftness of a person's speed defined the winner. Therefore, now that she was using illusionary step, even Feng Lianying on Gold Core stage was unable to see where Hishi's real body was. Good, very good. I never would have thought that mere foundation establishment stage trash could have pushed me up to this point. The fury on Feng Lianying's face slowly vanished, transforming into a deep coldness. Loosening the grip of her right hand, her long sword worth several million spirit stones fell to the ground and produced a clang as it hit. It seems that you obtaining Zijin Palace's inheritance wasn't purely by luck. But since it's this way, it's even more reason for me to not allow you to keep on living. People like you would be a threat to me in the future, so it's better to eradicate you while you're still weak. Moreover, since you also attempted to seduce Brother Yu, if I'm unable to kill you today, I'll be in great trouble. The next moment, the shadow of a sword slowly formed in Feng Lianying's hand. But this sword was different from the previous fire attribute longsword. This sword's entire body seemed to emit the coldness of ice spiritual power. The sword flickered, and the spiritual herbs around the sword completely froze, and at a speed visible to the naked eye, the frost spread to cover the ground all around it. Zhou Yenin cried out in alarm, "The ice crystal sword! A top-graded weapon, the ice crystal sword! Don't you have fire spiritual roots? Why are you able to use the ice crystal sword?" Feng Lianying slightly raised her chin, an arrogant smile breaking across her face. "Why do you think this fairy can be called the 1,000-year unparalleled genius martial artist of Lu Li sect? It's because I have the rare dual attributes of water and fire, two of the heavenly spiritual roots of the world." Zhou Yenin was dumbstruck. Dual attributes of the heavenly spiritual roots, where both attributes were completely unrelated. The dual attributes of water and fire, two of the heavenly spiritual roots, were represented when a martial artist practiced water and fire attribute cultivation methods. If practiced correctly, instead of each attribute canceling each other out, it could result in each one complementing the other. If you were a martial artist with just one attribute of the heavenly spiritual roots, you were already considered to be a rare genius in the world. Yet Feng Lianying was a gold core stage martial artist with dual attributes of the heavenly spiritual roots. How could young master she ever hope to defeat this woman? Chapter 247, Paying the Price. If Zhou Yenin were to know that Heshi, who to his eyes had no chance of winning, possessed 5 attributes of the heavenly spiritual roots, his jaw would probably drop in shock. Feng Lianying's gaze was filled with contempt as she looked at Heshi. Don't think that just because you were a little smart and have a tad bit of skill that you can regard yourself as a genius. Compared to a real genius, you're still far from that and remain as trash. Ever since this fairy got this ice crystal sword, I've never let it touch blood, so today, the two of you can be the first. Consider it a privilege." Finished speaking, Feng Lianying brandished the ice crystal sword in her hand. Following that, crackling sounds were heard that could make anyone's teeth ache, and in the blink of an eye, it was as if even the air was frozen. Those shadows of Heshis dispersed into the air one by one, disappearing without a trace. Shortly afterwards, a figure who was running away was firmly frozen by a layer of ice and was completely unable to move. It was Heshi. Feng Lianying burst into laughter, quickly stepping forward. "I said before that I would certainly dismember your body. Brat, now you shall break apart with my capsule of ice." Feng Lianying raised the ice crystal sword and fiercely threw it towards the frozen Heshi. However, before her sword could reach Heshi, the capsule of ice suddenly exploded with a bright red light. Feng Lianying was startled, but before she had time to react, she suddenly felt an acute pain in her abdomen. This caused her utter a miserable and mournful cry. At the same time she felt pain, her ice crystal sword had stabbed into Heshi's shoulder. The broken capsule of ice shattering into an icy powder that sprinkled the tops of their heads. Both of them had beautiful appearances, and under the fall of glittering ice dust, they seemed both stunning and breathtaking. But Feng Lianying's current expression was like she had met a ghost, terrified and filled with disbelief. The two of them were standing very close together. The dagger that had just been held in Heshi's hand was now nestled in Feng Lianying's abdomen, while Feng Lianying's ice crystal sword was deeply embedded into Heshi's left shoulder. Obviously he had been frozen, but how was he able to thaw the ice capsule? Cold energy from the ice crystal sword slowly spread throughout Heshi's wound, but before it could completely freeze the left side of her body, the corner of her mouth curled up into a meaningful smile. "Ice Lotus Fairy, it seems that I forgot to tell you. It isn't only you who possesses a gift of dual attributes of the heavenly spiritual roots. Furthermore, you seem to have forgotten what I said before. If you injure my people, you must pay the price." Even if I'll die, I will certainly make you pay a big price first. No. This is impossible. Feng Lianying screamed as she fell backwards. As the two separated, a squelch could be heard as the dagger and sword were pulled out of the pair, causing fresh blood to pour from their wounds. Feng Lianying covered the wound on her abdomen with her hands, her face filled with shock, resentment, and defiance. No. I don't believe it. You're just trash, a useless person. How could you and I have the same innate skill? It was at this point that Feng Lianying finally realized that Heshi had deliberately been frozen by her. This was in order for her to draw closer to Heshi and loosen her guard while thinking that she was winning. Just before, Heshi had used her formidable water attribute cultivation method, so Feng Lianying had thought she was a martial artist with a single water attribute spiritual root. Hence, she had never thought that Heshi would be able to escape with only her left side being frozen, until Heshi broke free. Heshi reached out her hand to briefly press down on several of her acupuncture points, blocking the cold energy from spreading further. She then used her fire spiritual power to heat the cold energy corroding her meridians. Thus, her complexion became pale, and her body tottered on the verge of collapse due to the excessive use of spiritual power to halt the ice-cold energy invading her body. Chapter 248, Terrible Poison. But Heshi didn't stop to rest, and instead waved the white bone whip in her hand. Her aura picturesque as she flew over and appeared before Feng Lianying. Feng Lianying, who was immersed in her shock and hatred, suddenly snapped out from her thoughts with a burst of killing intent within her eyes. Bastard, so you want to sneak attack me with your minuscule abilities? In your dreams? After speaking, about a dozen swords appears in her hand and she immediately charged towards the white bone whip. As they collided, the white bone whip was chopped apart inch by inch under the sword swinging, falling to the ground like small worms. As Heshi's body was strongly pulled forward by Feng Lianying, she felt a palm harshly strike her chest. However, the moment the spiritual power reached Heshi's body she swayed, and like a kite that had its strings snapped, she flew into the air before spitting out a mouthful of blood. Feng Lianying had missed Heshi's vital organs, but it was still enough oppression by immense spiritual power to make her qi and blood surge, as well as cause pain in her 5 internal organs. Feng Lianying sneered in loathing, detest, and contempt. At this moment, the wound on her stomach had started to recover, and she used her towering frame to look down at Heshi. No matter how hard you struggle, you're just like a mantis trying to stop a chariot. Do you really think that with just your tiny cultivation base, that you can successfully attack me? You think I sacrificed my white bone whip and risked being injured in order to attack you? The corner of Heshi's mouth curled into a sneer as she continued. Feng Lianying, could it be that until now you still haven't realized that there's something wrong with your wound? Feng Lianying became alarmed and lowered her head to see the wound on her abdomen in disbelief, noticing that it had already started to coagulate with dark spots appearing around the wound. Her previously arrogant voice was now trembling due to fear. What did you do to me? Heshi supported her still stiff left shoulder as she stood up, laughing coldly. I only smeared the drop of an interesting poison on you. This poison initially had no effect towards you gold core stage martial artists since the moment you become poisoned, you just need to take the antidote and you'll be fine. But, Ice Lotus Fairy, apparently you let jealousy affect your mind. Now the poison has invaded your dantian and begun to spread throughout your meridians. How does it feel? This is impossible. How could your poison hurt me? Desperation and panic flashed on Feng Lianying's face. It must be known that martial artists of gold core stage were basically already immune to poison, unless it was highly poisonous like dense viper orchid which was manufactured by a high-level martial artist. Otherwise, a martial artist's body itself would naturally repel the impurities from the poison. But now her body had really shown signs of being poisoned, and the circulation of her spiritual power was also slowing down. That brat was nothing but foundation establishment stage trash. He seemed to be about 16 to 17 years old, so how was it possible that he could concoct such a terrible poison? The long sword appeared once more in Feng Lianying's hand as she aimed it at Heshi and screamed, "Bastard! If you don't want to die, then immediately hand over the antidote." Though Heshi's complexion was pale and her voice was weak, her face still wore an indifferent sneer. It should be me saying those words. If you want me to hand over the antidote, I can. Now kneel down and apologize for me. Very well. Did you think that with just an insignificant poison that this fairy would really be afraid? Feng Lianying's expression twisted, and suddenly, a dark red medicinal pill appeared on her hand. As soon as that medicinal pill appeared, it emitted a delicate fragrance. Even if you were to merely smell this fragrance, it could give anyone a feeling of their spiritual power becoming incessantly agitated. Chapter 249. Mutual Destruction. Feng Lianying held the red medicinal pill in her hand with a conflicted expression on her face. This red pill was called a red phosphorus pill. It was one of Lu Lisek's secret protection methods, and a pill that was used to save a life in a crisis. Once you took a red phosphorus pill, no matter how serious a martial artist was injured, it would heal in a flash. Regardless of being infected by any poison, it would also completely clear up. Even the user's cultivation base would rise in a short time period, with their spiritual power increasing several-fold. However, this powerful red pill wasn't without side effects. After taking a red phosphorus pill, the martial artist's meridians would be damaged to a certain extent, and they would lose the possibility of advancing for at least 3 years. Therefore, unless they had reached a moment where they needed to use it as a last resort, the disciples of Lu Lisek absolutely wouldn't take it. Feng Lianying had always been ambitious and lofty. Desperately pursuing Nangong Yu's steps, she had initially planned to advance to nascent soul stage within 10 years to be on an equal level with him. However, if she took this pill, her desire would become only a dream, because it would be impossible to improve her cultivation base in such a short time, let alone reaching nascent soul stage. But just the thought of Heshi, that bastard, as well as his and Nangong Yu's intimate scene, Feng Lianying was burning with the fires of jealousy, completely losing all rationality. So much so that she didn't carefully notice that at this moment, the poison that had been congealing in her dantian was slowly weakening and dissipating. After all, when Heshi had made her poisons, she was only at foundation establishment stage. So for a foundation establishment stage's cultivation base being able to manufacture a poison harmful to a gold core stage martial artist, that was as difficult as wanting to ascend to heaven. If only Feng Lianying had been paying attention, instead of being blinded by her jealousy and fear, she would have known that the poison simply couldn't injure her. At most, it could only add a few dark spots on her skin. Feng Lianying's expression twisted, and suddenly raising her hand, she swallowed the red phosphorus pill. In the blink of an eye, her spiritual power increased sharply from the energy throughout the secret territory, giving off an ominous feeling. The ice crystal sword abruptly appeared in her hand once more, and Feng Lianying's body slowly rose into the air to hover in place. She then looked down in contempt and disgust at Heshi and Zhou Yenan below her, like she would stare at tiny ants. You made this fairy lose the inheritance, and made me pay such a big price by taking the red phosphorus pill. I swear that today I'll cut off your limbs and destroy your dantian, making it so that you'll spend the rest of your life as neither a person nor a ghost in a boundless hell. This is the price you have to pay for committing an offense against me, Ice Lotus Fairy. After her words, Feng Lianying's body shook, and the ice crystal sword fused together with her body as she charged straight towards Heshi like a tornado. Zhou Yenan exclaimed out loud, his face filled with despair. Heshi pursed her lips as she stood her ground, a formidable spiritual power vortex slowly condensing in her hand. This spiritual power wasn't only her made of her own power, but part of her space's unimaginably vast spiritual power. Once this spiritual power vortex exploded, not only would Heshi and Feng Lianying die, this entire area of the secret territory would be affected. However, Heshi's expression only showed a cold determination. There was neither remorse or indecision, rather, there was a determination capable of destroying heaven and exterminating earth, a conviction to die in mutual destruction. She had said once before that even if she should die, she would certainly make Feng Lianying pay a painful price. That price was death. But, just as the condensation of her spiritual power vortex started spinning faster and faster, and the ice crystal sword in Feng Lianying's hand drew closer to her. A sudden scarlet light shone before Hushi's eyes, blinding her. But before she had time to react, it enveloped herself and Zhou Yenin. Chapter 250. Gu Lufeng. A loud bang echoed around the area, and the ice crystal sword very quickly turned into steam and evaporated into the air as it hit the barrier of red light. Additionally, the barrier of red light slowly dissipated from the impact of the ice crystal sword, similar to when ice and fire collided and melted. The next moment, Feng Lianying's body was thrown backwards far into the distance. And as she coldly and gloomy glared at the barrier of red light, it disappeared without a trace. Before Heshi had time to react, Zhou Yenin became startled and shouted in delight, "Young master, you finally came." Along with Zhou Yenin's words, a figure in bright red clothes appeared in front of Heshi. From Heshi's angle, she could only see that this person was slender and wearing a white mask on his face. Painted on the white mask was a queer ghost pattern, making the person look somewhat sinister. His pair of peach blossom eyes that weren't covered by the mask were gleaming like the reflection of waves under sunlight, a beauty that gave people a one-of-a-kind feeling of attraction. Once Feng Lianying noticed the white mask on the person's face, she couldn't help but cry out in alarm, "Gu Lufeng!" Although Heshi had never heard the name of Gu Lufeng before, she was very aware of Xingde Hall in Yanjing City. While its appearance was that of a small medical store, in actuality, it was a powerful intelligence organization. And the organization behind it mustn't be underestimated. And it could be assumed that the man addressed as Young Master by Zhou Yenin was the owner of Xingde Hall. Gu Lufeng unhurriedly opened his mouth and said, "Ice Lotus Fairy, long time no see. I trust you've been well since we last met?" Having heard what he said, the look on Feng Lianying's face twisted with fierceness. She didn't understand. All she wanted to do was kill a Foundation establishment stage brat. It should have been very easy, but why did someone constantly appear to hinder her? Is that brat really so lucky? Feng Lianying grit her teeth as she answered, "Gu Lufeng, can it be that you want to meddle in my business too? Granted that if you want to meddle, you have to consider whether or not your strength is a match with Lu Li's sect." Since Gu Lufeng was wearing a mask, his expression couldn't be clearly seen. But even so, his voice gave a sense of laziness and indifference. "Fairy is so serious. The thing I dislike the most is meddling in other people's business. Similarly, my Gu Liufeng's people also absolutely don't turn to other people to teach someone a lesson. I wonder how shopkeeper Zhou offended Fairy, to the extent that Fairy was using heavy hands on him." Feng Lianying's gaze shot back and forth between Zhou Yenin and Gu Lufeng, a glint of coldness flashing within her eyes as she said, "The one to start a feud with this Fairy wasn't really shopkeeper Zhou, but rather that Foundation establishment stage stinky brat. So if you grab your man and leave now, making him vow to never reveal what happened today, I'll let you off. How is it?" After Feng Lianying finished speaking, the look on Zhou Yenin's face became apprehensive. He anxiously looked at Heshi and couldn't help but move his gaze to Gu Lufeng, taking quite a while before he mustered enough courage to say, "Young master, I owe young master Shi a debt for saving my life. I can't abandon him, no matter what." However, Gu Lufeng seemed as if he hadn't heard him. He just slightly narrowed his eyes as he stared at the arrogant Feng Lianying in front of him and faintly sighed. "It seems as if Ice Lotus Fairy has misunderstood my intentions. Who said I asked you to let shopkeeper Zhou off?" Hearing this, a smug smile graced Feng Lianying's face. Since young Master Gu understands the advantages and disadvantages, then that's for the best. Zhou Yenin has dishonored this fairy, so he should be given a lesson. I can promise that this fairy will be able to keep his little life. Chapter 251. Hiding one's ability by keeping quiet? The corners of Gu Liufeng's eyes twitched as he continued, "What I mean is, Ice Lotus Fairy, is that since you injured one of my people, let me return the favor to Fairy in the same way you injured him. That way, the grudge between us can be considered as settled." "You, Gu Lufeng, you're clearly unable to differentiate between good and bad." Feng Lianying's entire body was shaking from anger. "If you were tactful you would scram, and if you don't, Don't blame me for being impolite. Your cultivation base is rather equal with mine, but since I now have the assistance of a medicinal pill, my power far surpasses yours. Do you really think I'm afraid of you? Gu Lufeng laughed lazily, his eyes gleaming brightly. Or, Ice Lotus Fairy could choose to make amends by apologizing to my subordinate. You're looking for death. Feng Lianying furiously screamed, her whole body like a shadow sword as it shot over towards Gu Lufeng. Currently, what she hated the most was hearing others ordering her to kneel down and apologize. Shi Yu, that bastard, had humiliated her. In this lifetime she would never forget this. In the blink of an eye, two figures, one red and one white, were locked together in battle. The two people's movements were extremely fast as they flew about in the air of the secret territory. They were constantly using formidable spiritual pressure wantonly, causing bright lights to bloom in the sky. Zhou Yan'an watched on in a daze for a while. He felt a tightness in his chest, and although he was also a gold core stage martial artist, his current level wasn't enough for him to be a match in such a battle. He watched on with an extremely serious expression, strangely able to follow the movements of the two people in the air. To her surprise, at this time the two seemed to be evenly matched in their fight, but she felt that Gu Liufeng's strength seemed to be far more than what he was exhibiting. Was he hiding it? He frowned and seemed to be in trance, yet suddenly her eyes came into contact with a pair of eyes that seemed to be smiling yet not smiling. This pair of eyes resembled peach blossom petals. It was like they gleamed with the reflection of bright multicolored sunlight, but in a flash, these lights disappeared without a trace. Gu Lufeng. In such an intense moment of fighting, he was actually still able to be distracted enough to look at her. Moreover, those eyes contained a smiling expression that was deep and yet tranquil, as if they could see through her mind. He suddenly lowered her head, a touch of contemplation sweeping across her eyes. Zhou Yan'an noticed He bowing his head. With the side of his face delicate and pale, his whole aura was that of a frail yet beautiful porcelain doll that could shatter at any time. He couldn't help but comforted him with, "Young Master Shi, you don't have to worry, as long as my young master is here nothing will happen to us. Although he's only at gold core stage, he's entirely different compared to such a useless person like me. I've also never seen a martial artist on the same level beat him." He raised an eyebrow without answering, instead suddenly asking him, "Shopkeeper Zhou, we only met by chance and I have no affection towards you, so why did you want to risk your life to save me?" From the beginning He couldn't figure out this point. She could understand why Dandan and the little golden dragon would save her, but Zhou Yan'an and her were only strangers by chance. Helping her might be normal, but risking his life to save her was really too strange. Zhou Yan'an's face showed a trace of shame and indecision as he stayed silent for a long while, before replying, "To be honest, this humble one initially came to Zijin Palace to get the inheritance, but it wasn't for the Maha inheritance. Rather, it was to get a pill prescription from Zijin's master." Hexi's face showed her surprise. She had already received Zijin Palace's inheritance, hence she naturally knew that there wasn't any pill prescriptions included in the inheritance of Zijin's master. At most he only left her an extraordinary pill furnace in Zijin Palace. Chapter 252, Xia, why are you here? Zhou Yan'an continued and said, but after seeing young Master Shi, this humble one suddenly felt that compared to a fabled pill prescription of Zijin's master, maybe young Master Shi is our real savior. Savior? What does he mean? Zhou Yan'an's body was weak and his complexion pale, but at this moment he got up from the ground and deeply bowed towards He. Young Master Shi, to be quite honest, this humble one risked his life to save you because there's something I must request of you. Tell me. If this humble one didn't guess wrong, young Master Shi is the genius doctor who healed Ouyang's heir. Zhou Yan'an was a little nervous as he looked at He, and it wasn't until she nodded in admission that he heaved a sigh of relief. He then continued and said, after we leave the secret territory, this humble one wants to ask young Master Shi for help with saving a person. Zhou Yan'an's words were extremely straightforward, and He released a long sigh. She was most afraid of being slyly schemed against and used as a chess piece. Shopkeeper Zhou's facade was plausible in how he dealt with business, but it was her most liked way of doing things. In any case, it was best to be clear about any business transaction over owing an unfathomable favor. Thinking up till here, He slightly raised her head and lightly said, "Okay, I agree to your request. It can be regarded as returning your favor of today." The 17-year-old youngster didn't have the slightest trace of hesitation on his face when speaking, and eyes were shining astonishingly bright. If such words were said to others, it would make people feel that he was arrogant. But in the case of this youngster saying it before Zhou Yan'an, he felt that it was only right, and hence he was incomparably happy and relieved. When the two of them were chatting, He's expression suddenly changed slightly. She sensed many people coming in their direction, each of their auras very powerful and frightening. Furthermore, she didn't know whether it was a group of friends or foes. Just when she was about to warn Zhou Yan'an and Gu Lufeng who was in the air, Feng Lianying abruptly uttered a pain screech. And like a kite being snapped from its string, she fluttered as she fell backwards towards the ground. Gu Liufeng's eyes filled with obvious astonishment, and then narrowing his eyes slightly, he revealed an interested smile. The next moment, a murderous aura as sharp as a sword charged straight towards Gu Lufeng. Gu Liufeng's expression turned slightly serious, replacing the previously indifferent expression he had when battling with Feng Lianying. With a wave of his hand, a blazing red sword appeared gripped in his right hand. Two swords then collided in high altitude, making an explosion of tremendous energy that caused spiritual energy to fluctuate throughout all of the secret territory. After the explosion, Gu Lufeng stumbled backwards a step and slowly fell to the ground. Because his qi and blood were boiling, blood as bright red as a cherry started flowing down his thin lips that were exposed under the mask. "Young master, you're injured?" Zhou Yan'an exclaimed, then struggled to get up to treat Gu Lufeng. Gu Lufeng smiled slightly, his deep gaze looking towards the people slowly appearing from not far away. His voice clear as he said, "His Highness Hell King's cultivation base is profound. You really do have a well-deserved reputation." Among the group of newcomers, many of them were gold core stage and above martial artists. In the front, a man dressed in a purple robe had anxiety plastered across his face as he held the deathly pale Feng Lianying in his arms, desperately shouting, "Little sister Lianying, are you okay?" Behind the purple-robed man, walking with an indifferent manner and a gloomy expression upon his face, was Nangong Yu with eyes as cold as ice. Nangong Yu's icy cold gaze swept over Gu Lufeng, and as they landed behind him, his eyes suddenly widened. "Sheer, how come you're here?" Nangong Yu's voice abruptly became high, causing everyone present to almost jump in shock. Chapter 253. Why can't I be here? His Highness Hell King's strength and identity were thought of as unattainable. His attitude to the outside world was always indifferent, cold, and unyielding. Even when everyone was rushing like ducks towards this dangerous sealed dragon domain, his attitude was like a skillful butcher with a cleaver. He didn't attach the slightest importance to any of the treasures. But at this very moment, anyone who was observant could see how agitated Hell King was, how much anger and worry was contained in his voice. Qing Long, who was behind Nangong Yu, held back the impulse to support his forehead. Why does his master become a completely different person every time he saw Miss Naylan? He, of course, saw Nangong Yu. She had noticed earlier than Gu Lufeng and Feng Lianying that there were people approaching, but before she had the time to think any further, Feng Lianying seemed to have been seriously injured and fell, uttering a delicate yet miserable shriek. At first He felt that this was strange. The whole time Gu Lufeng hadn't been trying his hardest, while Feng Lianying had become quite powerful after taking a red phosphorus pill. So how could she have somehow been hit? It wasn't until she saw the purple-robed man holding Feng Lianying in his arms with a face full of rage, and Nangong Yu following behind that she understood. Her heart filled with an icy sneer. So it was a stage trick. No wonder she would rather bear Gu Liufeng's blow. It was all for the sake of staging this scene. Didn't she see how angry and how distressed her brother Yu was now? Thinking up to here, a corner of He's mouth curled into a cold smile. "Your Highness Hell King and Ice Lotus Fairy could come here, So why can't I come? Or do you think this secret territory was opened by your Hell King manner? Nan Gongyu was dumbfounded. How long had it been since he'd heard Sheer using such a cold tone when speaking to him? However, when Nan Gongyu's gaze fell to the wound that hadn't yet healed on her left shoulder and her small pale face, his heart tightened with intense anger and distress. How can this girl be so reckless? What kind of place is this sealed dragon domain? Even gold core stage martial artists were cautious when they would come, and yet she, such a delicate woman, actually dared to enter the inner layer of the secret territory. If something had happened, Nan Gongyu didn't dare to think any further, the fear and worry in his heart changing into an overflowing fury. It caused him to walk over in large strides to the little girl who watched him with a stubborn attitude. However, he barely took a step when the corner of his robes were pulled by someone, while in his ears came Feng Lianying's weak voice, "Brother Yu, I'm cold, so painful." Upon saying that, she abruptly began to vomit blood. Her beautiful face had become a deathly pale. It looked like she could die at any moment. The purple-robed man holding her felt distressed. Due to his worry, perspiration was rapidly dripping down his face, and seeing Feng Lianying clinging to Nan Gongyu, he couldn't help but urgently say, "Nan Gong, what are you doing just standing there? Quickly come and check on little sister Lianying's condition." Nan Gongyu didn't look back or turn to go see Feng Lianying. Rather, he stared at Heshi with a burning gaze. The purple-robed man urgently said once more, "Nan Gong, don't forget what you owe towards the Lu Li sect. If little sister Lianying dies, your lifetime debt won't ever be cleared. You still won't think of a way to save little sister Lianying? Do you want to see her die?" Nan Gongyu's figure became slightly sluggish, before in the end he stopped and turned around to check on Feng Lianying's condition. Heshi coldly watched this play of Nan Gongyu turning around, squatting down, and enveloping Feng Lianying in his spiritual power. When she saw Feng Lianying's bashful and hopeful expression as she stared at Nan Gongyu with fixed eyes, her heart surged with a violent anger. Chapter 254, Troubling Young Master Heshi wasn't angry with Feng Lianying's shamelessness, nor was she angry with Nan Gongyu's heartlessness. Rather, she was angry towards herself for actually being tripped over by a stone twice. She clearly knew that love and promises couldn't be trusted, yet why did she still care about it like a dimwit? And she clearly knew that she shouldn't be tempted, that she couldn't believe them. Yet why did she still allow other people to occupy her heart little by little? Heshi, Heshi, in the end, what were you expecting? Were you expecting that Nan Gongyu would abandon his childhood sweetheart and come to you? Or that you would be enough to turn him against his childhood sweetheart? Dream on. But since she had now woken up to reality, if she were to withdraw now it wouldn't be too late, would it? Heshi's hands tightly clenched into fists, not at all sensing her fingernails embedding themselves into her palms. Suddenly, a man's deep and magnetic voice entered her ears. This could be disastrous. His Highness Hell King and his bodyguard Qing Long, as well as Lu Li Sec's senior disciple Nye Jinshin, all of these few people possess at least the high-level strength of a gold core stage martial artist. His Highness Hell King is the strongest, so strong that no one can find out the depth of his strength. Now it seems that our situation is bad, really bad. Heshi came back to her senses and glanced at the man wearing bright red beside her. When she saw him say the words "really bad," she noticed that his expression was relaxed and without a trace of worry. But when he withstood Nan Gongyu's sword attack, he had obviously sustained a heavy surge of spiritual energy. Now the bright red blood on his thin lips had faded into a pale color. Heshi suddenly reached her hand out and gripped his wrist, then started pouring her spiritual power into his meridians. Gu Lufeng was startled. By reflex he wanted to struggle and free his hand, but when he realized the way in which she was examining his condition, he couldn't help but show an interested expression. "You're the little genius doctor that Yenin mentioned?" But before Heshi could answer, Zhou Yenin had already replied. "Young master, it is him, genius Dr. Shiyu. His medical skill has reached perfection. Even Ouyang's heir was able to have his broken meridians healed after more than a year of disability. Believe me." Zhou Yenin hadn't yet finished speaking when Gu Lufeng took back his hand, preventing Heshi from continuing to examine him. Heshi didn't force him, instead indifferently saying, "If you want to completely dissolve the energy from the sword concealed within your body, I need to give an acupuncture treatment to your 3 acupuncture points, lung meridian, shoulder meridian, and back meridian." Gu Lufeng stared blankly, then fixedly looked at her for a moment before suddenly laughing. "Then I'll have to trouble young Master Shi." After saying this, he didn't mind in the slightest and took off his clothes, exposing the packed muscles and smooth veins on his naked upper body. Heshi stood behind him and nimbly started to insert the silver needles in her hand into his acupuncture points. Then her figure flashed and she came in front of Gu Lufeng, inserting the last silver needle into his lung meridian acupuncture point to slowly help the excess energy drain out. Hence Heshi's movements became very slow, while the thin and transparent silver needles held in her fingers lightly twirled. This was accompanied with the pure essence of spiritual power permeating into the air little by little. At this moment, Gu Lufeng sat cross-legged on the grass with Heshi slightly bending her body over him to rotate the silver needles with a focused and dignified expression. The natural light in the secret territory fell on the youth's fair face and shined upon his straight exquisite nose, pink and tender cherry lips, as well as long eyelashes that were as thick as a fan. The youth's head leaned forward slightly, his long shapely eyebrows lightly creasing. From Gu Liufeng's point of view, he could see the youth's pointed chin, fair and slender neck, and the fine radiance slowly extending to his delicate collarbone, which then slanted to his slightly open robe. Chapter 255. Pull out your tongue. The youth's slender and fair hand was just like piece of carved jade as it gently hovered over his bare skin, while every so often the youth's cool touch would bring with it a throbbing feeling that made him shudder. Gu Lufeng felt a sudden skip in his chest, and bowing his head, the steady energy within his body suddenly surged and brought a bright red color to lips once again. His expression was calm, but in his mind a line continuously echoed. This little genius doctor called Shiyu was rather too good-looking. As soon as Nangong Yu crouched to examine Feng Lianying's condition, he immediately knew that she only had minor injuries. It simply wasn't as serious as the expression on her face suggested. With his face turning gloomy, he then got up and went to find Heshi. Yet just as he did, his robe was once again pulled on by Feng Lianying. "Brother Yu, just then I had to take a red phosphorus pill to be able to compete against Gu Lufeng. Later on, I won't be able to advance, right? Brother Yu, will you dislike me then?" Even with this remark, Nangong Yu still didn't respond. However, Nie Jingchen's, the purple-robed man's, complexion changed, and with distress and anger flashing across his face, he said, "Little sister Lianing, didn't Master say that unless it was a last resort, you shouldn't take a red phosphorus pill? Your innate skill is rare. Taking a red phosphorus pill will encumber you for several years." Feng Lianing showed a sad and grievous expression, while her beautiful eyes gazed at Nangong Yu as she choked on sobs. "I was all alone, while the other side had 3 people. If I didn't use a red phosphorus pill, I don't know if I could have waited until the arrival of you all and Brother Yu. If I didn't have the assistance of a red phosphorus pill to allow me to hold on until this moment, I don't know how they would have humiliated me. They're going too far." Nie Jinshin roared with a gravelly voice. "Since they dared to hurt you to such a point, I'll make those 3 wretches pay you back 1,000 times over. Little sister Lianing, just wait, I'll go take revenge for you now." However, Nie Jinshin hadn't yet finished speaking, when Nangong Yu's face darkened and he coldly said, "Shut your mouth." Nie Jinshin was startled and didn't react for a while. His face expressed a somewhat confused look. Nangong Yu's cold gaze swept over him, and he unhurriedly stressed his words, "If you say wretches again, I'll pull your tongue out." The weather in the secret territory was warm, but Nie Jinshin felt so cold he was shivering. Nangong Yu's gaze at this moment was too frightening. It was as if Nie Jinshin continued speaking, the other party would immediately tear him to shreds. However, Feng Lianying's pretty face twisted, intense jealousy and hatred glinting in her eyes. From his clothes, Nangong Yu withdrew a bottle of medicinal pills and threw it to Nie Jinshin. "Give this pill to Lianing and use your spiritual power to unblock her meridians. After an hour she will be healed. Joy flashed within Nie Jinshin's eyes. If he had to use his spiritual power to unblock her meridians, then that meant that he and little sister Lien Ying would have to be in close contact. Nie Jinshin was the senior disciple of the head of the Lu Li sect. At such a young age he had already reached the peak of Gold Core stage, so it could be said that he had boundless prospects. Throughout Mi Luo continent there were many women who admired him, completely willing to be his concubine. But in Nie Jinshin's heart he had always been attracted to his junior, Feng Lien Ying, no other woman. With regard to Feng Lien Ying's words, he took them as absolute truth and would never disobey her. Now that Nan Gongyu had given him an opportunity to get close to his goddess, how could he not be happy? Nie Jinshin poured a medicinal pill out of the bottle for Feng Lien Ying to swallow, but was fiercely pushed away. Watching as Nan Gongyu got up without hesitation and abandoned her, her heart was filled with extreme hatred. She was startled as the crimson robes were wrapped around her. A slight trace of warmth and fragrance wafted from the clothes, making the uncomfortable feeling of a moment ago disappear in a flash. While Gu Lufeng was now only wearing white inner clothing, his aura seemed leisurely and graceful as he nonetheless firmly protected her behind him. Gu Lufeng faced Nan Gongyu, the sound of laughter clear in his voice. "Your Highness Hell King, I've always respected you as a hero of Jinling Kingdom, but now you're unable to distinguish the truth from lies and have listened to woman's slander. I'm afraid that isn't very wise, right?" How could Nan Gongyu pay attention to what he had said, when his heart and eyes were only filled with the sight of this man and He standing very close together? Furthermore, this man had even dared to drape his clothes over He's body. His complexion was so glacial it seemed like water could be squeezed out of it, while his voice was like a demon's from hell. Immediately get away from her. Otherwise, don't blame me for being ruthless. Chapter 257. Oscar winner Gu Lufeng was startled. He felt that Hell King's attitude was very strange. But before he could speak, He pulled on his sleeve and stood in front of him. She then coldly said, "Move aside, this has nothing to do with you. The person they want to deal with is me, so you should take shopkeeper Zhou with you and leave now." Gu Lufeng ignored her and heedlessly walked up to stand by her side. "You don't know this, but from the moment Feng Lien Ying and I fought, our fates became intertwined. That shameful woman is so petty, do you really think that she'll let us off?" He's brows wrinkled, and glancing at the faint spiritual power fluctuations of Zhou Yenin next to them, her voice became gloomy. "Sorry, it's because of me that the two of you have become involved." As Gu Lufeng tilted his head to look at the side of He's beautiful, snow-white face, he could feel his heart softening. It was as if there was a warmth slowly building in his chest. But before he could say something again, his expression suddenly changed. His hand that had initially moved to console He was abruptly pulled back, and he staggered backwards several steps. A sharp, sword-like energy fiercely struck his body and he fell to the ground. This made grass bits fly everywhere, some fluttering to land on He's hair and clothes. Gu Lufeng lifted his gaze, only to meet with Nan Gongyu's dark and fearful glare. It was in these eyes that he saw a murderous rage, one that seemed as if Nan Gongyu wanted to dismember him, crushing his bones and scattering their dust. The next moment Nan Gongyu changed his line of sight, looking from him to the point next to him. Glaring at the pale complexion of he slowly extended his hand. "Shir, come here." He coldly looked at him, the look on her face like condensed frost. "Go over there, what for?" "To allow you, your Highness Hell King, to kill me and take revenge for your beloved little sister Lianing?" The look on Nan Gongyu's face was beyond ugly, and he suddenly walked forwards a step before darkly saying, "Shir, in your heart." His words hadn't yet finished, when Feng Lianing, who had previously been lying on the grounds acting like she was on her last breath, stood up. With Nie Jinshin's support, she went to Nan Gongyu's side and grabbed his sleeve. "Brother Yu, don't be like this. Young master, she didn't purposely injure me, you mustn't blame him." He looked at the intimacy of the two people, and the coldness in her eyes became colder, little by little, like a 1,000-years-old glacier. Such a pure and kind-hearted white lotus. Look at that emotion in her eyes, that expression, and that tone. If this act had been seen in her past life, then Feng Lianying would definitely have been suitable to win an Oscar. In front of people she appeared pure, cold, and noble, but behind their backs she was malicious and fierce. And now, she had managed to change once more by becoming delicate and pitiful. A man would unconditionally believe her and want to cherish her, wishing to hold her in their arms. Nan Gongyu was also a man. With such a beauty throwing herself into his arms, how could his heart not be moved? As she sneered at her own thoughts, Gu Lufeng suddenly leaned towards her and whispered in her ear, "Little Yue, do you know if there's a problem with that fairy's eyes? Obviously it was me who injured her, yet why is she implying that it was you who injured her? You're only foundation establishment stage, while she's gold core stage. By saying that it was you who injured her, isn't she afraid of losing face? Little Yue? Where did that stupid nickname come from?" Heshi aimed a glare at him, then looked back at Feng Lianying and sneered, "You say that as if she wasn't injured by me, and that she hadn't hurt anyone before me. So what if she was a gold core stage martial artist? She dared to provoke my people. Even if she herself wasn't a match with Feng Lianying, the least she could do was make her pay a price of being skinned alive." At this moment, Feng Lianying was wearing a white dress stained with specks of crimson blood, while her complexion was deathly pale. As the wind blew, it caused her white dress to flutter, making her appear like a willow, all delicate and charming. Chapter 258. Don't touch her with your dirty hands. Upon hearing Hishi's remark, rage flashed in her eyes first, before glistening teardrops welled in them. Pulling on Nan Gongyu's sleeve, it seemed as if she had suffered an enormous grievance as she bit her lip and said, "Young Master Shi and young Master Gu's relationship is really good. I'd heard that Gu Liufeng's conduct was usually arrogant and unsociable, yet today you unexpectedly agreed with young Master Shi to regard me an enemy. The friendship between the two of you is really enviable. However, since I'm considering giving young Master Shi face, I won't bother dealing with Gu Lufeng. You'd better go, quickly leave before Brother Yu gets angry. Rest assured, I will try my best to appease Brother Yu." Though she'd said it in a lovely and pitifully manner, provocativeness and bragging was visible in Feng Lianying's eyes. As she looked at Heshi, a coldness appeared in her eyes that quickly disappeared, and when she turned to look back at Nan Gongyu, she acted gentle and kind-hearted. Nie Jinshin was still supporting her on the side, and his face had long become flushed due to anger. Having heard everything she was saying, he could feel his rage growing. "Nan Gong, don't listen to little sister Lianying. She was too kind-hearted, and that made some people who are unable to tell good from bad dare to have such ideas against her. Such vicious people like these, they shouldn't be spared. Let them know how people end up when they commit an offense towards people they shouldn't offend." Gu Lufeng clicked his tongue in praise, and putting a hand on Hishi's shoulder, he sighed, "I've seen shameless people, but I've never before seen one so shameless. I never would have thought that the famous Hell King would actually fancy such a disgusting woman. Really, seeing it for yourself is 100 times better than hearing it from someone else. Little Yue, I think it's better that we don't get involved with this bunch of insane people. They're so shameless that it's unbearable to watch. Since we aren't their match in strength, we might as well take this opportunity to run." Having said that, Gu Lufeng leaned close to Hishi's ear to seemingly tease her, and whispered, "In a moment I'll count to 3. You take Yenin behind me and hide. We only have one chance to escape." Heshi nodded, but when she raised her head she met with Nan Gongyu's burning gaze, causing her chest to feel like it was being crushed by a heavy stone. Suddenly, Nan Gongyu walked towards her with large steps. And because Feng Lianying was still latching onto his sleeve, she ended up stumbling due to his abrupt movement. She watched Nan Gongyu's back in disbelief as he left with quick strides, and she immediately shouted loudly, "Brother Yu!" However, Nan Gongyu's pace didn't pause in the slightest. It even seemed as though he didn't hear her. Seeing Nan Gongyu walk towards them, Gu Liufeng's face became grave. So leaning closer to Heshi's ear once more, he went to whisper to her. All of a sudden, lightning appeared out of the blue to fiercely strike Gu Liufeng's arm. Staggering a step backwards, he uttered a muffled groan. The arm that had been struck by lightning now a bloody sight to behold. Nangong-yu glared at him with a ruthless and bloodthirsty gaze, his voice dark and cold as he spat out from between his teeth and lips, "I said, don't touch her with your dirty hands." Gu Lufeng was startled, but before he could react Heshi had already grabbed his injured arm, quickly spilling a silvery white medicinal powder onto the wound. In the blink of an eye, that bloody wound rapidly stopped bleeding and healed. Following that, in such a short moment, it had already become a scab. Heshi heaved a sigh of relief and asked him in a somewhat concerned voice, "Are you okay?" Just as those words left her mouth, she felt something tightly wrap around her waist. But before she could realize what was happening, her body soared into the air to land in a warm embrace. When she raised her head, her eyes met with Nangong-yu's bloodshot eyes. Chapter 259. How could I kill you? The eyes glaring at her were frighteningly bloodthirsty, and paired with such a murderous aura being exuded from his body, it could make anyone tremble from fear. It was as though in the next moment that she would be torn into shreds and devoured. Heshi's heart sank little by little, while the corners of her mouth curled into a forlorn yet mocking smile. This man, does he hate her now? Does he hate her because she injured his beloved woman? Those previous sentimental feelings, those previous promises, in front of his beloved Ice Lotus Fairy, does he regard them as? Nangong-yu raised her chin, then slowly said, "Sheer, I just told you to come to me, didn't you hear me?" His voice was exceptionally gentle, but when it reached her ears, it caused her to shudder. She wanted to step away from him, but her entire body was enveloped by a tremendous amount of spiritual power pressure, leaving her unable to move even a single step. This was her first time directly experiencing Nangong-yu's formidable strength, helping her to understand how it made despair grow in a person's heart. Feng Lianying suddenly raised her voice and shouted from where she was standing not too far away from them, "Brother Yu, I know you're angry on my behalf, but young master, she is your friend after all. Please, consider my reputation and don't make things too difficult for them, okay? Young master, she didn't intentionally injure me, I believe he certainly knows his mistake." After saying this, she then turned to shout at Heshi, "Young master, she, quickly admit your mistake to Brother Yu. Otherwise, when Brother Yu's anger explodes, even I won't be able to stop him. Do you want to just helplessly watch on as your young master Gu dies in Brother Yu's hands?" Heshi sneered upon hearing that, and a lustrous purple shade gleamed within her jet-black phoenix eyes. She then firmly stared at Nangong-yu as she said, "Is this your purpose for calling me over? It was to kill me to take revenge on behalf of your close female friend? Nangong-yu, am I that foolish in your eyes? So foolish that I'll obediently send myself to you and let you kill me?" Nangong-yu's entire body shook, and his arm that was wrapped around her waist tightened as he said in a trembling voice, "Sheer, what nonsense you are talking about? How could I kill you?" Just hearing her say that and thinking that this girl might die in the secret territory, he was so scared his blood turned cold. Shia would actually go so far as to say he would kill her? "Young Master Shi, I said earlier that I won't let Brother Yu kill you, so why do you have to misunderstand me?" Came Feng Lianying's tear-filled voice. "Wasn't it enough that you had Gu Lufeng try to kill me? Yet now you also want to slander me in front of Brother Yu. Why do you hate me so much? Little sister Lianing, why you have to say so much to such a person? Just let me go kill him to avenge you." Nie Jinshin had reached his breaking point and he shouted at Nangong-yu, "Nangong, you still haven't quickly killed him yet to avenge little sister Lianing? Don't tell me that you really want to see our Lianing that has always been protected since childhood suffer such a grievance?" Nangong-yu's face twisted upon hearing Nie Jinshin and Feng Lianying's words. The murderous intent within his eyes seemed to condense into a storm, as though at any time he could tear everything apart before his eyes. However, before he could make a move, a red light as sharp as a sword suddenly flew before Heshi. Latching around her waist, it quickly pulled her out of Nangong-yu's embrace. Gu Lufeng caught Heshi in the air, then steadily descended to the ground. Shoving Heshi behind him, he coldly said to Nangong-yu, "Your Highness Hell King, Are you really unable to distinguish right from wrong today by being used as a tool by that woman? Get lost. My matter with Sheer has nothing to do with you. Heshi tugged on Gu Liufeng's sleeve, her face cold as she said, "Don't meddle again. The person they want to kill is me. This has nothing to do with you and shopkeeper Zhou." Chapter 260, Stay Your Hand. Although Gu Lufeng said that he had a way to escape, as long as Nangongyu pursued them, in the end she would still be involving them. This being the case, then it was better that she settled it alone with Nangongyu. Anyway, even if he really did want to kill her for his beloved little sister Lianing, it was only killing one person, that's all. Gu Lufeng revealed a reckless and uninhibited smile on his face as he spoke in a clear voice. How could it have nothing to do with us? Today, since I see you as pleasing to the eye, I'm regarding you as my, Gu Liufeng's friend. Since we're friends, your matters are naturally my matters too. How could I abandon you here alone? After saying that, he stepped forward a step to block Heshi from view, then said to Nangongyu in a gravelly voice, "Dignified Hell King, do you really want to place your hands on a weak teenager whose strength is so much lower than yours? If this news was to spread, aren't you afraid that you'll become a joke of the whole world?" Nangongyu's gaze fell on Gu Lufeng. His cold, tyrannical gaze made Gu Liufeng's back tense in a split second. "You think you can stop me?" Upon saying that, Nangongyu raised his right hand. This caused an invisible force to sweep towards Gu Lufeng. Gu Liufeng's complexion changed, and he started working the spiritual power within his body to bring forth his weapon. However, between the span of 2 breaths, his body and spiritual power seemed to be confined by something. There seemed to be a formidable energy encircling him, making him unable to use any spiritual powers. The most frightening thing of all, though, was that his body began to uncontrollably move forward, as if there were invisible hands controlling his body and quickly pulling him towards Nangongyu. The next moment, Nangongyu's palm suddenly clutched Gu Liufeng's neck. His look was extremely calm compared to a moment ago, but the storm contained within his eyes seemed to be able to destroy heaven and earth. Drops of cold sweat seeped out from Gu Liufeng's forehead. In this very moment, he was clearly aware that the man in front of him really wanted to destroy him. "Ooh? Why are you near her? Why are you standing in between Sheer and I? In this world, anyone who futilely tries to snatch her away from me will die." Having heard that, Gu Lufeng was startled, shock appearing in his eyes. What was the meaning behind His Highness Hell King's words? Wasn't he getting revenge for that black-hearted White Lotus? The hand gripping his throat suddenly tightened, and Nangongyu's body exploded with a burst of formidable spiritual pressure and a murderous aura. It seemed that at any second Gu Lufeng would meet with a violent death. "Don't do it. Young master. Nangongyu, stay your hand." 2 voices echoed at the same time. Zhou Yan'an's face was filled with fear and despair. Almost without thinking, Heshi summoned an ice sword to her hand and charged straight towards Nangongyu and Gu Lufeng. No matter what, she couldn't involve Gu Lufeng and allow him to die for her in this secret territory. See, Heshi disliked most the feeling of owing someone else, let alone the price of a life. The ice sword charged straight towards Nangongyu, drawing dangerously close to his heart and chilling him to the bone. Nangongyu turned around to avoid the attack. With his eyes staring fixedly at her, his icy cold, gloomy voice was filled with hoarse disbelief and heartache as he asked, "You actually want to raise your hand and fight me for another man?" Heshi was engulfed by the swirling storm and pain within his eyes, causing her heart to become stifled as she saw this. "Sheer, tell me, do you really want to attack me for another man?" Heshi's face paled, and the tense grip of her hand around the sword loosened. However, seeing an insidious smile on Feng Lianying nearby, as well as Gu Liufeng's slightly swollen and purple complexion, her expression quickly became cold. "I said before, didn't I? Since Feng Lianying was injured by me, if you want revenge for her, then this has nothing to do with Gu Lufeng." Even for a martial artist, this wasn't a minor injury. Nangongyu, why didn't he dodge? However, Hushi had just stepped forward, when a sudden force fiercely knocked her aside. She staggered twice and almost fell. Her ears then heard Feng Lianying's distressed cries, "Brother Yu, are you okay? So much blood keeps flowing, how could this happen?" As she said that, she glared tearfully at Heshi, then bitterly shouted, "Young Master Shi, how could you harm him? Brother Yu has always been kind to you. You actually injured him for a stranger, even if you have a shameful relationship with Gu Lufeng, doing this was too much." After saying this, she then turned and looked at Nangong Yu's wound. As she watched the bright red blood pouring from the wound, translucent tears slowly trickled down her cheeks. "Brother Yu, don't worry, I have the best medicine for your wound in my possession, it will certainly heal you. Such a cruel, wicked, and ungrateful person, we definitely won't be having any encounters with him in the future." Chapter 262. It has nothing to do with you having heard that. Hushi's eyes darkened and she turned to walk towards Gu Liufeng's direction. "Where do you think you're going?" A roar suddenly echoed around them, seeming as if it would rip apart heaven and earth, while a formidable amount of spiritual power pressure erupted from Nangong Yu's body. Feng Lianying was caught off guard as she stood beside him, and she went flying into the air like a kite with its strings snapped, crying miserably in shock the whole time. Nie Jinshin immediately caught her in his embrace, asking in a concerned tone, "Little sister Lianing, are you all right?" Feng Lianing, however, pushed him away and rushed back towards Nangong Yu. Brother Yu, I'm Lianing. Let me see your wound." However, before she could get near Nangong Yu, she was once again sent flying into Nie Jinshin's embrace. Feng Lianying was shocked to discover that Nangong Yu was now in the center of an invisible spiritual barrier that he had formed, and Heshi was inside the spiritual barrier with him. Nobody could get close to the pair, but Heshi couldn't escape either. At this very moment, apart from Heshi, no one else could enter Nangong Yu's eyes. But why does Brother Yu only have eyes for that bastard? What's so good about that brat? He injured Brother Yu, but instead of Brother Yu killing him, it seems that he's using every possible means to keep that bastard by his side. Feng Lianying bit on her lower lip hard, so hard that she didn't even realize the blood slowly starting to trickle down her chin. And so now that Heshi was trapped inside the spiritual barrier, before she had time to react, Nangong Yu's figure abruptly moved and appeared before her in the blink of an eye. And slowly he started approaching her step by step. His stature was tall and slender, with a handsome face that could make every woman in the world captivated with him. But at this moment, his face was positively glacial, like it had gathered thousands of years' worth of ice. This matched his body, which exuded a terribly dark aura. As he slowly approached Heshi, the blood from his chest exuded a strong metallic smell. This, in contrast to his pale and handsome complexion, made him seem like a fallen demon king. "Sheer, where do you think you're going? Are you going to that man? Is he that important to you?" Heshi's complexion paled. The immense amount of spiritual power pressure being emitted from Nangong Yu's body was making it extremely difficult for her to breathe. However, when she met with Nangong Yu's rage-filled eyes, her stubbornness stirred, and she raised her small chin into the air as she coldly said, "In regards to whoever I want to go to, it has nothing to do with you. It has nothing to do with me." Nangong Yu took a step forward, and in the blink of an eye he arrived in front of Heshi, tightly gripping her shoulders as he asked, "Then who does it have anything to do with Gu Lufeng?" Heshi bit her lip, her expression icy and unbending as she hoarsely said, "If yes, then so what? You can go back to your beloved Ice Lotus Fairy, so please don't interfere with my life from now on." A scarlet blaze suddenly ignited within Nangong Yu's eyes, and the atmosphere around him was abruptly filled with a crackling noise that echoed all around them. At the same time, terrible dark clouds covered the sky of the secret territory, layer by layer. In an instant it seemed like it was about to rain, and that a major catastrophe was about to occur. Hishi's face was filled with shock, and without having a chance to speak, she suddenly felt extremely dizzy. It was like her body was being drawn into a powerful vortex. The enormous amount of spiritual power within the vortex constantly fluctuated as it pulled at Heshi's body, making her feel like she would be torn apart at any moment. However, very quickly she felt herself being held in a warm embrace. That embrace emitted a formidable amount of spiritual power pressure that enveloped her and blocked all the pain that she was experiencing. She then vaguely seemed to hear a man's gloomy voice echo in her ears, and it was tinged with a slight amount of exasperation and deep love. "Shir, you're mine. You'll forever be at my side." Chapter 263. Infidelity. Heshi drowsily opened her eyes as she felt the breeze caress her cheeks and tease her hair. As she went to move her hands and feet, she instead felt her body being restrained by something. When it sensed that she wanted to struggle, whatever was confining her seemed to tighten. Looking up, Heshi saw Nangong Yu's pale and handsome, yet cold complexion enter her sight. She was so shocked that she started struggling harder to free herself. However, Nangong Yu's hands were restraining her and he tightened his arms around her body. "Nangong Yu, let me go." "Dream on." Nangong Yu replied coldly. "I said it before, but in this lifetime only you can be my princess, and only you can be my woman. If you dare to get close to other men, then I'll kill all the men around you." Heshi was annoyed and grit her teeth as she retorted, "Who's your woman? Wasn't your woman your beloved little sister Lianing? Since you like to imprison people, you can just go back and lock her up to prevent her from randomly disturbing people." Nangong Yu lowered his eyes as he looked at Heshi. His expression was like condensed frost as he said in a somewhat helpless tone of voice, "When have I ever said that Feng Lianing is my woman? In this lifetime, I've never even touched a woman's hand. The only woman who I've ever been intimate with and touched is you, Shir. Who'd believe you?" Heshi suddenly started moving her spiritual power about, intending to struggle free from Nangong Yu's embrace. But when she fell to the ground, she was surprised. She was actually able to free herself so easily from Nangong Yu? As Heshi was confused, she started examining her surroundings and became surprised when she discovered that she was now in what appeared to be a valley. Surrounded by tall and sturdy sheer cliffs, the peaks couldn't even be seen due to being blocked by the clouds. "Where is this? How could we come to this place? Where are the other people?" Heshi glared at Nangong Yu as she asked him. Nangong Yu faintly replied, "Because of you cheating and being intimate with another man, it made my spiritual power arise and become unstable. It seems to have accidentally triggered a restriction in the secret territory, so we were both sent to this place. I also don't really know where we currently are." "Who are you saying cheated?" Heshi angrily said. "I'm a doctor. My work is to help and treat people. Cheating your head." The chilliness within Nangong Yu's eyes melted a little as he revealed a hint of delight, but in the blink of an eye it disappeared, changing into a look of confusion and grief. "But for him you stabbed me with a sword. In your heart, isn't he more important than me?" Heshi raised her eyebrows. Her gaze couldn't help but land on Nangong Yu's body. The always powerful and callous Hell King was at this moment wearing clothes filled with bloodstains. His handsome face was pale without a trace of color, while his arched and elegant thin lips were slightly pursed, displaying his frustration and hesitancy. So she reflexively said, "I don't like owing others, and I didn't want to owe him and shopkeeper Zhou a favor. If you had killed him and he died because of me, I would have owed them. Who knew that even though your cultivation base is so high, you unexpectedly couldn't dodge that sword?" Having heard that, Nangong Yu's eyes lit up with a bright light, and the lost look on his face disappeared without a single trace. "So, for Shir, that Gu Lufeng is just a stranger you don't want to owe a debt to?" Heshi sneered as she said, "He naturally means less than His Highness Hell King and Ice Lotus Fairy's intimate relationship." Nangong Yu revealed a helpless look. "Shir, how many times do you want me to say it?" He hadn't yet finished speaking when his face suddenly changed, and he reached out his hand to pull Heshi back into his arms. Before Heshi could react, she felt a formidable and fierce energy rise behind her back. Chapter 264. Believe in your man. While carrying Heshi, Nangong exerted himself to turn around, then he gently pushed her to the side. Almost at the same time as she was in the air, Hushi turned her head to see behind her and noticed that a gigantic rock bird had appeared. The rock's whole body was light brown. When its two enormous wings were spread out, it almost covered the entire valley. Its sharp beak seemed to flash like the cold tip of a bent blade as it faced their direction, threateningly aiming to pierce them. The appearance of this rock was too sudden as it had appeared without any warning at all. It was as if it had torn its way out of an invisible space, so even Hishi's divine senses hadn't detected it. However, Nangong had managed to sense it. Moreover, his first reaction was to shove Hishi aside. Unfortunately, the rock's powerful and sharp beak severely pierced Nangong's left shoulder during his protection of her. Blood instantly splattered everywhere, dyeing Nangong's body with blood, and adding an additional wound on top of his previous one. Nangong! Hishi screamed in fear and wanted to rush towards him. But the next moment she found out that she couldn't move, because her body was enveloped by a transparent spiritual barrier. She was confined by a void spiritual barrier. The moment Nangong had pushed her away, he had wrapped her in a void spiritual barrier to protect and confine her. What does that bastard think he's doing? Just then, Hishi saw Nangong stumble back several steps due to the impact, yet a corner of his mouth curled into a sneer. His hands suddenly gripped the rock's beak that was as solid as iron, and with all his strength, he lifted it up using its beak. Then he ruthlessly smashed it to the ground. The strong smell of blood wafted towards the tip of Hishi's nose. Examining Nangong's bloody left shoulder, as well as the wound on the left side of his chest that had yet to stop bleeding, she could no longer bear it and yelled, "Nangong, you bastard, quickly release me." Although it was only for a short moment, Hishi had clearly sensed that Nangong's spiritual power was weakening. She recalled the warmth that had wrapped around her and protected her when space had ripped apart and twisted with that vortex, as well as Nangong's overly pale complexion. He must have expended too much spiritual power in that space distortion to protect her, and coupled with the injury on his chest, his current strength would be about 30% less than normal. However, that rock was a fierce beast with a horrible amount of spiritual power pressure. It was even more powerful than the golden python. How could the current Nangong deal with it and escape unscathed? After throwing the rock, Nangong's figure swayed slightly and his face paled further. When he heard Hishi's words, he laughed proudly. "Sheer, you have to believe in you, man." Just as his words faded, his right hand unfolded, and in a flash a dark, slender, and long sword appeared in his hand. A black aura curled upwards from the sword's body, and accompanied by the sword's spiritual power, the originally clear blue sky of the secret territory suddenly turned completely dark. Next, following lightning and thunder, a gale erupted. It was a force that slowly built up power in the valley, capable of extinguishing heaven and earth. And at this moment, the rock that had been knocked down stood up. But because of Nangong's attack, the feathers covering its entire body were now puffed up, while its brown beak was stained with blood. With its pair of fierce, bloodshot eyes, it appeared particularly frightening. Suddenly, the rock's wings fiercely flapped, creating a violent gale that mixed with sand and pebbles as it attacked Nangong. Hishi's heart felt like it was being squeezed by something, and as she spoke, the voice escaping her mouth was hoarse and trembling. "Nangong, quickly release me, do you hear me?" Within the gale, Nangong's hair was being blown in every direction. His entire body was dyed red with blood and his clothes were disheveled. But nonetheless, he gave off a wild and unruly charm. Chapter 265, Will You Die If You Don't Show Off? A corner of his mouth lifted into a charming smile, and he said with a gentle voice, "Relax, I'll come to you after I finish dealing with this beast. Just obediently wait for me." After saying that, he waved his left hand. Following this, the void spiritual barrier suddenly soared into the air, bringing Hishi to a remote cave at the furthest corner of the valley. This place was far from the battlefield and was protected from the dark thunderclouds and gale. From here you could see the gale sweeping sand, pebbles, and grass into the air, and a space enveloped by a dark aura in the center of it all. The fierce battle was being carried out before her eyes, yet she couldn't see or do anything to help. Suddenly, within the dark aura, there came a violent cacophony of loud sounds. Shortly afterwards, the rock soared high into the sky. It then waved its 100-meter-long wings, which made a sharp whistling sound echo throughout the valley. All the broken rocks in the valley were swept up by the gale, while all the vegetation was pulled up from the ground. Scattering everywhere, some even flew towards Heshi, but fortunately she was completely covered by the void spiritual barrier. Heshi's hands tightly clenched into fists when she saw Nangongyu fly like an arrow into the sky, leaving only a shadow as he faced the rock. As one black and one yellowish-brown shadow collided in the air, it sent a terrible shockwave throughout the valley. It was as if fireworks bloomed magnificently in the sky as brown feathers rained down as far as the eye could see, while a thick smell of blood filled the sky. Imprisoned in the cave, Heshi at this moment sensed that the energy of the void spiritual barrier was gradually weakening, which meant that Nangongyu's spiritual energy was also gradually weakening. She was so anxious it felt like she was being burnt alive as she constantly pounded against the void spiritual barrier, but all to no avail. Suddenly, a shrill bird cry pierced her ears and a glaringly bright flash of thunder lit up the sky, lighting up a black shadow savagely slicing the rock from its neck, straight to its heart. Heshi stared blankly at the sky, completely oblivious to the void spiritual barrier disappearing. With a tremendous thud that echoed loudly throughout the valley, the rock's dead body fell from the sky and smashed a huge hole into the ground. Then, Nangongyu slowly descended from the sky still holding his sword and landed beside the rock. Heshi heaved a sigh of relief. Loosening the fist she'd clenched so tightly that she'd hurt her palms, she then quickly ran towards him. Unfortunately, once she was close enough to Nangongyu and could clearly see his appearance, she sucked in a cold breath. Other than his face, Nangongyu's entire body was filled with wounds. Chapter 266, I'll never let go. His warm breath tickled Heshi's ear and made it burn, so she quickly edged further away. This guy simply didn't care about his life. His injuries were obviously serious. For an ordinary person, getting this badly hurt would be fatal, but he was acting like he wasn't even the one who was injured. The absorption rate of 9th secluded spring water was 100 times more powerful when compared to other normal healing medicines. So using the spring water, Heshi poured some on his wounds, while the rest she made him drink. Color slowly began restoring itself to Nangongyu's pale complexion, while the garish wounds on his body began to rapidly heal at a speed visible to the naked eye. However, Nangongyu's body had many injuries, and most of them were so deep that even his bones could be seen. Even if they healed, sinister scars would still remain. When Heshi examined those scars, her brows couldn't help crease as it reminded her of that extremely disturbing battle scene and the fear in her heart. Nangongyu laughed lightly as he teased her. Oh, the wounds are extremely ugly, huh? Does Sheer dislike me now? Heshi clenched her teeth to suppress the hoarseness and choked tone in her voice, fiercely responding, yes. So ugly that just looking at them is irksome. Nangongyu raised his eyebrows, shamelessly pressing closer to Heshi as he whispered, don't most people say that a man with a scarred body is sexy? Heshi was treating the bone fracture on his arm, and when she heard that, her movement of pressing her hands on his wound momentarily slowed. If other people think you're sexy, then you can go and find them. Heshi sneered. Nangongyu released a muffled groan, his face showing a pained expression. Following this, his pained expression turned into one of grief with his long eyelashes slightly hanging down. Now you know what pain feels like. Heshi's heart couldn't bear it, and the voice that left her mouth was unyielding as she applied excessive pressure to his wound. In the future, let's see if you dare not treasure your life. As long as Heshi is by my side, no matter how heavy the injury, this king won't be afraid. Nangongyu abruptly reached out his uninjured hand to wrap it around her slender waist, pulling her into his embrace. Sheer, you won't leave me, right? No matter where you go, I'll always follow you. I'll absolutely never let you go. Always follow me. Are you a malicious spirit? He glared at him, then she turned to free herself from his arms. She no longer wanted to pay attention to this man's shameless words. Instead, all of her energy was being spent on treating Nangong Yu's injuries. Whether it was the horrible scars or the broken arm, while all of them were terrible to see, in actuality they weren't that big of a deal. With Heshi's medical skills and the ability of a nascent soul-stage martial artist's powerful regeneration and healing, she could guarantee that within a few days Nangong Yu would be completely recovered. Rather, the most troublesome part was the excessive amount of spiritual power that Nangong Yu had consumed when he was fighting with the rock. Due to such a depletion of spiritual power, his meridians were burnt in many places, and they would need time to be nursed back to health. After some thought, Heshi took out a decoction used to restore meridians that was made of high-grade spiritual herbs that grew in her space, and water from the 9th secluded spirit spring. However, when she went to pass the decoction to Nangong Yu, he shook his head without hesitation. "Sheer, you can see that I'm currently unable to move freely, so why don't you feed me instead?" "Heshi, it was only your right hand that was fractured, your left hand is still okay. How come you can't drink the medicine on your own?" Nangong Yu turned his head to the side, unwilling to look at the black medicinal liquid in Heshi's hands any longer. With a gloomy and sad face, he said, "You personally gave Gu Lu Feng, that brat, acupuncture treatment. Your hands even touched his body, yet you refuse to feed me. Sheer, in your heart, am I less important than him?" A corner of Heshi's mouth twitched. She refused to say a word. Nangong Yu's expression filled with resentment and sadness, and suddenly grabbing his black long sword, he used it to support his body as he stood up. Chapter 267, Protect You Throughout This Lifetime. Unfortunately, with his spiritual power currently depleted and his physical strength completely exhausted, before he could properly get up he staggered and heavily fell to the ground. "Nangong Yu." Heshi rushed to support him, cold sweat appearing on her spine due to fright. "Are you unwilling to live anymore?" Nangong Yu's jet-black eyes were scorching hot as they stared fixedly at her. Just half an hour ago he still had the appearance of a monster that could extinguish the world, but now he looked like a pitiful dog with his watery eyes. Heshi felt defeated by him and ultimately, she picked up the bowl on the side, then unhappily said, "Okay, I'll feed you. Lord Hell King." A corner of his mouth slightly raised. Regardless of Heshi's opposition, half of his upper body leaned against her as he happily accepted Heshi feeding him the medicine. Occasionally he would touch Heshi's soft and delicate cheek, his expression one of satisfied contentment. But after barely being fed 2 spoonfuls, his hand touched Heshi's wound on her left shoulder and realized that it felt cold. Instantly his eyes darkened and the glint of a cold light flashed within them. Heshi was just about to feed him the 3rd spoonful of medicine when she abruptly felt a warmth on her shoulder. Then, a burst of spiritual power covered the wound on her left shoulder. For a split second, her cold body and frozen to the point of numb left shoulder instantly restored to their original condition. Heshi's eyes widened. "Nangong Yu, this guy." Obviously, his spiritual power was depleted, and with great difficulty he was finally able to restore some, but now he'd used it to treat her minor injury. Is there something wrong with this guy's brain? While Heshi had still been inside the secret territory's Zijin Palace, she'd naturally sustained an extremely heavy injury, but it was mainly the depletion of her spiritual power and she hadn't had enough time to recover it yet. After drinking some of her spiritual spring water she'd felt much better. And as for the injury on her shoulder, she'd intended to transfer her spiritual energy around the wound to expel the cold air and help it to naturally heal. Compared to the current condition of Nangong Yu's injury, Heshi's small injury was simply nothing. Yet just as Heshi was about to say something, she heard Nangong Yu's dark voice vowing in her ears, "Sheer, believe in me, I'll protect you throughout this lifetime." Heshi's body slightly startled and her heart felt as if it was being scratched by something. It was itchy, yet gentle. However, very quickly she remembered the scene that she'd seen not too long ago. Nangong Yu had turned around to examine the extent of Feng Lianying's injury, leaving Heshi behind. Furthermore, for Feng Lianying he'd pierced Gu Lu Feng with a sword. The fire in her heart instantly extinguished as if cold water was poured on it, like the frigid winter wind blowing into a warm room. Heshi's complexion hardened and became cold as she indifferently said, "Nan Gongyu, since it's an impossible thing to do, why even promise in the first place? You only dare to say it while we're in the secret territory, but if I really killed Feng Lianying, would you honestly let me off?" Nan Gongyu blankly stared at Heshi, watching as a corner of her mouth lifted into a cold smile as she said, "You said that you'll protect me throughout this lifetime. So if I tell you that the injury on my body was caused by Feng Lianying, what would you do? Would you kill your beloved little sister Lianying?" Nan Gongyu's body stiffened slightly and he lowered his eyes to hide the surging emotions within them. Sensing the icy atmosphere and alienation being projected from Heshi's body, he really wanted to say something. Unfortunately, due to circumstances, he had to swallow back the words that were already on the tip of his tongue. Nan Gongyu stayed silent, as she'd expected. Seeing this, although Heshi had long ago prepared her heart, an unspeakable disappointment and rage still surged within her heart. She sneered and said, "Gu Lu Feng and I merely injured her a little, and yet you couldn't wait to choke me. If I'd really killed her, weren't you going to want my life in revenge? Nan Gongyu, even though things are like this, you still dared to say that you'll protect me throughout this lifetime? Don't make me laugh." Once he finished speaking, he bowed his head and using a slight amount of pressure, he bit down on her pink, tender lip, leaving red teeth marks. Heshi cried out in pain and pushing him away, she angrily asked, "Nan Gongyu, are you a dog?" Although Nan Gongyu's words were pleasing to hear, whenever she recalled the scene of Nan Gongyu abandoning her to take care of Feng Lianying, she felt extremely uncomfortable. In Heshi's heart, a deep scar still remained. Without a doubt, in Nan Gongyu's heart, no matter how interested he was in her, there would still always be a place for Feng Lianying too. Regardless of whether it was out an emotional bond, a sense of responsibility, or some other secret concern, the fact remained that Feng Lianying was special to Nan Gongyu. And she, Heshi, was bound to monopolize whichever man she fancied. No one was allowed to covet him, and no one could snatch him away. If he had another person in his heart, then she'd rather not want him. Heshi lowered her eyes and indifferently said, "Don't you think you care too much? Your closeness with your little sister Lianying. I'm not asking anything about it, am I? So why do you get to have a say in who I touch?" Nan Gongyu's expression sank as if he wanted to get angry. Yet when he saw Heshi's stubborn little face, he then sighed and said with a trace of resentment in his voice, "But Sheer, isn't this your responsibility?" Chapter 269. Risking One's Life for Adventure, huh? Heshi was stunned. "What does it have to do with me?" Nan Gongyu pulled her closer and laughed. "It's exactly like how I help you to get rid of the flies around you. You're also responsible for driving away the women around me." Heshi's expression blanked out for a while as she watched Nan Gongyu's handsome face slowly edging closer to her. Such a world-toppling face was now enlarged before her eyes with a tender and loving smile gracing his lips. It was just like a scorching sun dazzling people's eyes. "Sheer, you should know that all the women throughout the Jinling Kingdom want to marry this king and are lined up from Yanjing City, all the way to Yuyang City. This king won't disturb them, but since you're my princess, it's naturally your duty to drive those women away. Don't you agree?" Heshi felt his hot breath fanning her neck, while his bright eyes burned as they stared at her, seeming to swallow her whole. Her mind was in chaos as she abruptly struggled to get away from Nan Gongyu, and with a taut expression, she said, "You stop imagining that your love is reciprocated with an uninterested person who would want to help you drive away those women. As long as you don't provoke me, it wouldn't be any of my business even if you were flooded by flies." Nan Gongyu still wanted to say something, but he was fiercely pushed to the ground by Heshi's palms filled with spiritual power. Picking up the bowl of medicine on the ground, she fiercely said, "So, do you want to drink this medicine or not? If not, then should I throw this medicine away?" Nan Gongyu noticed that although her expression was fierce, the depressed emotion filling her eyes had started to decrease. Unable to help it, he heaved a sigh of relief, then quickly took the medicine from Heshi's hand and obediently drank it. After drinking the medicine, Nangongyu inspected their surroundings and saw that there was no longer a visible crack in the space they were currently in. Unfortunately, a trace of concern still remained within his heart. Sheer, this place must be a rift in the secret territory. Because it's existed for many years and gone through multiple spiritual energy surges, it's connected itself to a separate section of the secret territory. Nangongyu easily used the black sword in his hand to draw a line, tracing out a space of around 100 square meters. That rock was a 6th-rank spiritual beast, and a 6th-rank spiritual beast is already considered to be amongst one of the more powerful spiritual beasts. If the rock left its smell in an area, even if other spiritual beasts were to enter, they wouldn't easily dare approach. Sheer, during the time I move my spiritual energy in meditation, you can't leave this area. Although there were still a lot of things Nangongyu wanted to say, he held them in. In the sealed dragon domain there were countless hidden sections full of unknown dangers, all similar to high-level spiritual beasts like the rock. For a martial artist, entering one of the sealed dragon domain's hidden sections was really like risking one's life for adventure. Even though Nangongyu was arrogant, he wasn't conceited. While he had the ability to defend himself, he didn't dare promise that he would be able to enter and escape with Heshi in one piece. This was the reason why he hadn't let Heshi know about the sealed dragon domain. At this very moment, in Nangongyu's storage ring, countless treasures and medicinal pills were stored. All of them were capable of causing fights between Foundation Establishment Stage, Meridian Stage, and even Gold Core Stage martial artists. These were things that he had specially scoured every corner of the secret territory for, in order to give them to Heshi after he had left. His, Nangongyu's woman, was someone he wanted to protect properly, but he also wanted to give her the best presents to make her happy. If Heshi was willing, he would gladly accompany her to other secret territories suitable for Foundation Establishment Stage and Meridian Stage martial artists to help her advance in the future. However, it was currently suicidal for her to enter such a dangerous place as the sealed dragon domain. But it was now too late for those words, so Nangongyu kept his mouth shut. Since Heshi was already here, no matter what, he would thoroughly protect her at all costs. Chapter 270 Hop up. Taking advantage of Nangongyu's meditation to digest the 9th secluded spring water and the spiritual energy from the medicine, Heshi began to examine the rock's dead body. Unlike the golden python's broken bones, the rock's flesh was still intact, so the whole body could be collected. The rock's body was too broken by Nangongyu's strikes, while the sharp beak and claws that could have been used to make weapons were almost completely damaged by Nangongyu's sword. Knowing that only 30 to 40% of Nangongyu's strength remained, but that he was still able to beat a 6th-rank spiritual beast to such a miserable pulp, Heshi's heart couldn't help but quiver. In the end, just how strong was this guy's real strength? After Nangongyu finished absorbing the medicine's energy, he temporarily froze his internal energy to give his body time to recuperate because although the rock's smell was currently lingering in the area, there was also the strong stench of blood. This, coupled with the unstable cracks in their present space, meant that it wouldn't be safe to stay in this place for a long period of time. Just as he finished converging his spiritual energy and raised his head, he saw Heshi with her sleeves rolled up and readying herself to sort out the rock's dead body. He couldn't help smiling as he said, although a lot of spiritual power is contained within the rock's flesh, an unpleasant smell of urine lingers on it which is hard to remove and causes it to be hard to swallow. Sheer, if you're interested in the rock's corpse, just take its inner core, the rest isn't useful. Ignoring him, Heshi used a sharp dagger to cut down the rock's flesh, following along its veins. Without raising her head, she then answered, "Oh, it doesn't taste good? Then you won't get to eat any." After saying that, she threw the last piece of meat smeared with blood into her space. Then, lifting her head, the perspiration trickled down her hair onto her smooth white forehead. Her phoenix-like eyes were glistening brightly just like stars as they stared up at him. Nangongyu was fascinated by her lofty face and he couldn't help but laugh involuntarily. "Okay, I was wrong. I forgot that the most unpalatable of foods can be made into the most wonderful of treats in my shear's hands. My shear is amazing. Heshi snorted coldly. Nonsense. Are you done absorbing the medicine's energy? Where are we going next? Nangong Yu pointed his finger at the top of the cliff. Anyway, let's leave this valley first. We'll discuss this again later. After saying that, he used the black sword in his hand as a prop and slowly went to stand up. But before he could stand up straight, he staggered and almost fell back to the ground. Heshi immediately gripped his wrist and carefully started examining the vein located there. The more she checked, the more pronounced the crease between her brows became. While Nangong Yu's body had now been replenished with a lot of spiritual energy, this spiritual energy, however, had gathered in his dantian and wasn't able to spread to his meridians. Because the injury in his meridians was somewhat serious, it needs some time to self-heal. Moreover, his stamina had been almost completely used up, so it wouldn't recover within such a short amount of time. Heshi frowned as she looked at the high cliff, vaguely making out the tip of it through the layer of clouds. With Nangong Yu's current body, it would be too difficult for him to climb up, yet it would also be too dangerous if they didn't leave as they were near an unstable crack in space. You hop up? Heshi said as she suddenly stood in front of Nangong Yu, her back facing him. Nangong Yu was stunned to the point of standing still, and for a long while he didn't make a sound until Heshi once again urged him to hop up. Then, coughing lightly, he said, "Actually, I can go up by myself." Heshi turned to glare at him. "If you want to add another wound to your previous one, go ahead and climb up by yourself, but if a 6th-rank spiritual beast appears again, I'll have to fight it alone." Nangong Yu's expression was somewhat uncomfortable and his jade-like white complexion was slightly flushed as Heshi glared at him. So, he then grudgingly said, "This king's legendary reputation is going to be ruined by sheer hands." Chapter 271, Purple Abyss Vine. After saying that, he leaned his body forward onto Heshi's back and without hesitation, his hands encircled her slender waist. Heshi only felt something warm envelope her and was completely unaware of the weight she was now supporting. Instead, all her senses were concentrated to his lips as they slowly exhaled beside her ear. "I entrust this king's lifelong happiness to Sheer's hands." "Sheer, you have to take responsibility." "Responsibility, your sister." Heshi grabbed Nangong Yu's hands and gathering all her spiritual power, she then soared into the sky towards the top of the valley. The whistling wind passing their ears brought with it a gust of cold air, yet the man on her back was keeping her extremely warm. For a moment, Heshi's mind wandered. It seemed like it was only an hour ago when they were on opposing sides and on the brink of severing their relationship. But now, it had become a situation of dependency regarding life or death. Fate really loved to tease people. What sort of future would there be between Nangong Yu and herself? The cliff of the valley was really high, so even though Heshi's spiritual power was almost depleted, they still weren't able to see the peak. Fortunately, not too far away there was a cave in the cliff wall, allowing her to temporarily catch her breath and replenish her spiritual power. Landing steadily in front of the cave, Heshi was able to examine it up close and realized that while it looked shallow at first glance, it actually led deeper into the cliff wall. It only appeared shallow because it was covered by a thick layer of wisteria. However, this wisteria was quite strange as its branches were transparent and with a closer look, you could see a liquid flowing inside of it. Heshi couldn't help herself and took 2 steps closer to take a look at it. Suddenly, Nangong Yu's voice sounded in her ears. "Careful, this is a 5th-rank spiritual plant, Purple Abyss Vine." Unfortunately, Nangong Yu's warning came just a breath too late. Heshi's finger had barely brushed against the plant when she felt a strong wind attack aiming towards her face. The harmless-looking purple vines of a moment ago had moved together like a whip and thrashed themselves towards Heshi's body. Heshi was shocked and quickly retreated several steps, but the speed of the purple vines was faster. Furthermore, every vine heading towards her seemed to have the striking strength of a Meridian stage martial artist. Yet, just as Heshi was about to be hit, the sound of lightning abruptly crackled and echoed by her ears. The purple vines were struck by this wave of lightning and stopped, seeming to be hurt as they trembled along the ground. Several of the vines were completely burnt by the lightning and quickly shrunk back towards the cave entrance. Nangong-yu quickly pulled Heshi behind his back, and holding up the black sword in his hand, he prepared to attack the purple vines. But Heshi suddenly gripped Nangong-yu's hand and said with exasperation, "Nangong-yu, are you crazy? Even now you're still daring to use spiritual power. Are you looking for death?" Nangong-yu froze, and before he had time to recover, he'd already been dragged behind Heshi's back. Next, a powerful earth attribute barrier appeared to protect him and keep him firmly behind her. "Just obediently wait in there for me. If you dare move, then don't blame me for being rude." Seeing the girl's slim back blocking him from harm, Nangong-yu became momentarily stunned. For the first time, there was someone who treated him like a treasure and willingly stood in front of him to protect him. This feeling was very strange, yet also tremendously wonderful, causing his entire heart to feel sweet and sour as if it was soaked in honey. Why was his cheer always so special? Currently, though, Heshi was focusing on the danger before them. How would she know that behind her Nangong-yu's head was lost in thought? Seeing the purple vine's second attack heading their way, Heshi's heart lurched and she abruptly gathered her spiritual power. In the blink of an eye, a golden flame condensed into a spectacularly patterned ball on her fingertips before she quickly smashed it towards the purple abyss vine. Chapter 272 Spiritual Demon Plants were afraid of fire, so sure enough, as soon as the fireball touched the purple abyss vine, it instantly started burning. However, unexpectedly, even though the purple abyss vine was bathed in the fire, it didn't seem frightened like it had when it was being struck by the lightning. Instead, it seemed to tremendously enjoy the fire. All of its purple vines swayed gently in the flames, and at the same time, the spiritual power contained within the fire seemed to be diminishing. These purple vines were actually devouring the spiritual fire? A moment later, all of the golden flames were completely extinguished. Heshi's expression became grave as she prepared to withstand the purple abyss vine's next wave of attack. However, the purple abyss vine once again responded beyond her expectations. They indeed moved towards Heshi, but it had no intention of attacking her. Rather, it entangled itself around Heshi's feet and body with an action similar to fawning and acting coquettishly. Raising its sturdiest vine in front of her, it then swayed it to and fro. This pose made it seem like it was asking for something. For a moment Heshi was dumbstruck. Could it be that this purple vine was an M? Did it enjoy being attacked and wanted more? During this time, Nangong-yu standing behind her stepped forward and taking out a porcelain bottle filled with ninth secluded spring water, he poured 2 drops onto the purple vine swaying in front of Heshi. In the next instant, the scene unfolding before Heshi caused her further shock. The leaves of the purple abyss vine suddenly started emitting the hint of a violet light, and during this, they all stood straight up and swayed in sync. Heshi could have sworn that if there was music, the purple vines would have been dancing around in a lively manner. After moving about for a while in a synchronized dance, the violet light faded without a trace and the sturdier vines once again eagerly wrapped themselves around Heshi, this time including Nangong-yu in its fawning. Then, almost as if it was impatiently begging, it rubbed its leaves together to make a rustling sound. Heshi still hadn't completely come to terms with what had just happened when she heard Nangong-yu slowly speaking as he narrowed his eyes. "You want this?" As he shook the porcelain bottle in front of the purple vines, it immediately started swaying in exuberance. If it hadn't been afraid that Nangong-yu would attack it with lightning like before, it would have already snatched the bottle away. Heshi, however, was stunned. "It can understand what we're saying?" Nangong-yu answered, "There aren't that many 5th-rank spiritual plants capable of using divine sense, but the purple abyss vine is one of them and is therefore known as a spiritual demon plant. Spiritual demon plants can generally communicate with people like spirit pets." After saying that, Nangong-yu looked at Heshi with affection in his eyes. "Sheer, you have a muddled dantian and possess the spiritual power of all 5 elements, so advancing the spiritual root of your wood attribute is immensely important for you. Although the rank of this purple abyss vine isn't particularly high, it's still useful. Moreover, it's possible for it to advance in the future, so you should take it as your spirit pet. Hearing that, Heshi's heart was moved. You could say that possessing the spiritual power of all 5 elements would make Heshi exceptionally powerful, but at the same time, the road of ascension was also tremendously more difficult when compared to other martial artists. Since she was still a low-level martial artist, it wasn't too bad though, as she could only accumulate a certain amount of spiritual power. But if she wanted to advance to gold core stage in the future, she would inevitably need to make a breakthrough on the spiritual power of all 5 elements. This would help to balance her spiritual power and raise her chances of succeeding. It wasn't too difficult for her to advance the dual attributes of fire and water, but for several other elements, she had yet to find a method to help advance them. So in regards to this, it would definitely be useful for her to take a wood attribute spirit pet. But while many people took in all sorts of spirit pets, most of them were beast pets. How many of them were able to subdue plant spirit pets? Would the purple abyss vine really want to be her spirit pet? You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.